Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot into the sandy, moonlit gardens of ancient Egypt, where something seemingly innocent, crunchy, green, and honestly pretty great in a sandwich held a surprisingly unsettling place in the minds of temple priests. That's right, we're talking about lettuce, but not the kind you buy at Trader Joe's. This stuff had rituals, symbolism, and nighttime rules that would make even a seasoned mummy do a double take. Picture this. It's well after sunset. The Nile is whispering gently in the background, and the sacred temple gardens are silent, except for the occasional rustle of a reed or the suspicious creak of a garden gate. You're walking softly past rows of lettuce. Yes, lettuce. Each one standing like a little green soldier in the soil. There's a dry breeze. The stars overhead are scattered like sand on black velvet. And somewhere behind the temple walls, a priest is absolutely not okay with you being here. Because here's the thing, ancient Egyptian priests had a strict, almost paranoid fear of approaching these sacred plants at night. Lettuce, you see, wasn't just food, it was a symbol, a ritual tool, a divine suggestion, if you will. And like most things that are both divine and mildly inappropriate, it came with rules, especially after dark. You probably won't survive this ancient Egyptian bedtime story, not because it's dangerous, but because it's just that surreal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere interesting, let me know your location and what time it is as you listen. I love seeing where all our sleepy historians come from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move through the garden, toes crunching softly in the dry soil. The lettuce is arranged in neat rows, some still dewy from the irrigation channels that snake between the plants like mini Niles. The air smells sweet and loamy, with just the faintest edge of bitterness. It's the kind of place that feels peaceful at first, until you remember that these same lettuce patches are off limits to the temple priests after sundown. Why? That's what we're here to unravel, one leaf at a time. See, to modernize, lettuce is about as threatening as a feather duster. But in the ancient Egyptian worldview, it sat at the awkward intersection of fertility magic, bodily fluids, and gods who, let's just say, didn't always keep things G rated. At the center of this was a rather intense deity named Min. We'll meet him soon. Spoiler, he makes Hercules look like a stick figure. But even before Min's lettuce obsession, the priests had reasons to tread lightly around these leafy greens. Ancient Egyptians believed that the spiritual world intensified after dark. Spirits, gods, and the in between things drifted more freely through the air, and in that quiet, liminal time, sacred plants like lettuce could behave unpredictably. You pause beside one of the taller heads of lettuce. This one's got broad, crisp leaves and that milky sap glistening faintly under the moonlight. Yeah, that's sap. We'll get into it. A lizard skitters past your feet, unbothered. You glance back toward the temple, just faint outlines now, pale against the dark. The priests are in their chambers, ritually purified and fasting, most likely sleeping on mats with shaved heads and tightly folded linens. None of them would dare enter this garden now. Mainstream historians agree that Egyptian temple routines were exacting. Priests weren't just religious figures, they were also custodians of balance, Mayat, the cosmic order. They observed cleanliness rituals that would make a modern germaphobe break out in applause. No garlic, no bodily hair, no casual snacking. So the idea of sneaking out to caress a head of lettuce, culturally unthinkable, or at least not talked about. But lettuce was sacred, right? Yes, and that's exactly the problem. You don't mess with sacred things at the wrong time. Daytime rituals involving lettuce were highly choreographed. Nighttime? That was the domain of chaotic energy, shadowy forces, and whatever the lettuce was allegedly doing in the dark that made it so off limits. Historians still argue whether the nighttime lettuce taboo was a universal temple rule or limited to specific cult centers. Some papyri mention restrictions around divine produce after sunset, while others are curiously silent. But that silence, kind of loud. Back in the garden, you kneel beside a row and reach out to touch a leaf. It's surprisingly cool despite the heat of the day still radiating off the earth. That milky sap beads up like sweat, something the ancient texts loved to compare to other bodily fluids. Thanks, scribes. A fringe theory? That the lettuce absorbed moonlight and turned it into potent spiritual energy, too potent to handle outside of ritual. One surviving amulet warns of the plant that awakens desires under Isis's gaze. That's probably lettuce, or possibly mandrake, or, honestly, both. Ancient botany is confusing. You hear a soft splash, a frog. The water channel is flowing gently nearby. Maybe the garden isn't as empty as you thought. Somewhere, just out of sight, a sacred ibis stirs in its roost. Even the animals seem to give this place a wide berth at night, and the lettuce just sits there, innocent, green, and somehow smug about it. You lie back in the dirt, letting the breeze brush over you, eyes half lidded now. The stars drift lazily overhead, and you realize that even in this surreal, lettuce-scaped mystery, there's something oddly calming about it all. The past is weird, but weird in a way that's deeply human. We assign meanings to things, plants, gods, rituals, because we're trying to make sense of chaos. Even if that means being afraid of salad after dark, you're still lying in the dirt, a little lettuce adjacent, blinking slowly at the night sky and wondering what on earth you've gotten yourself into. Because here's the kicker, this plant, it wasn't just dinner. To the ancient Egyptians, lettuce was divine, sacred, fertile, and, in the eyes of some priests, deeply suspicious when the sun went down. During the day, lettuce had pride of place in temple offerings. It was regularly presented to men, a deity whose reputation precedes him. Think of Min as the ancient Egyptian version of that one guy at the gym who never skips leg day and is unreasonably confident at karaoke. Only Min also happens to be the god of fertility, male potency, and, quite prominently, erect statues. Literally. Min was almost always depicted standing tall, wearing a crown of two long feathers, with one hand raised in a blessing, or possibly a power pose, and the other holding his divine masculinity. Yes, ancient statuary did not believe in subtlety. And right next to him, you guessed it, a big ol' head of lettuce. Historians agree that lettuce, especially the tall, upright Lactuca cereola variety, was closely associated with men. Unlike the soft, leafy butterhead varieties you might toss into a salad today, this ancient lettuce stood rigid, secreted a sticky white sap when broken, and, well, kind of looked like it had ideas. You can see where this is going. To Egyptians, that milky sap wasn't just a coincidence. It was a potent symbol. It represented life force, male virility, or, depending on how much your face is blushing right now, something even more specific. Ancient texts describe offerings of lettuce to men during fertility rites, and depictions often show him with the plant right by his side, like a very awkward sidekick. So, why the fear after dark? Because what's symbolic by sunlight becomes something much more unfiltered under moonlight. Ritual spaces were full of boundaries between the sacred and profane, order and chaos, day and night. And some things, like lettuce, were safe in one half of the cycle, but suspect in the other. Imagine being a temple priest. You've shaved your entire body, including, yes, the eyebrows, fasted, abstained from certain foods, and performed hours of purification rituals. You're trying to keep your soul in alignment with Ma'at, the delicate balance that holds the cosmos together. The last thing you want is to be caught canoodling near a lettuce patch that might be channeling the god of fertility like a vegetable radio antenna. That's not just awkward, it's spiritually hazardous. A papyrus fragment found near Thebes hints at this unspoken rule. Do not enter the garden when the sky has no sun, for the plant of men stirs in silence, and no man is clean enough to bear witness. Creepy? Yeah, but also kind of poetic. Now let's shift our sandals over to a little known scroll held in a dusty European archive. It's a priestly manual that survives only in fragments, but one section makes a curious note. Offer lettuce to the statue of men at dawn, once the beams of Ra have awakened the ground. After dusk, let no hand disturb the garden, lest they risk the wrath of silent forces. That last phrase, silent forces, sounds like a late night supernatural podcast, but in ancient Egypt, it probably referred to liminal spirits, ancestral shades, or the gods themselves in their more mysterious moods. Modern scholars debate whether this fear of nocturnal lettuce stemmed from superstition or deeper ritual knowledge. Was it just a plant that looked a little too confident under starlight? Or did priests believe it absorbed some kind of divine essence during the night, making it too dangerous or too powerful to touch without proper ceremony? And here's a fun little footnote from Fringe Theory Corner. Some Egyptologists with a flair for drama suggest that priests may have witnessed unusual behavior around lettuce at night. They speculate about bioluminescent molds, rare desert fungi, or maybe just the eerie way plants move subtly in the cool desert air, rustling and stretching like they're breathing. Spooky salad energy, basically. You roll over slightly in the garden soil and reach for another lettuce leaf. It twitches in the breeze, as if to say, don't even think about it. Fair enough. Another theory, priests simply wanted to keep the gardens off limits at night to avoid less holy activities. Remember, Min was all about fertility, and the symbolism surrounding lettuce may have made the garden a tempting place for lovers or bored acolytes looking to test the boundaries of the sacred. Keeping everyone out after dark solved that potential PR disaster. And yet, despite all this suspicion, lettuce never lost its prestige. It was still offered to gods, depicted in tombs, and praised in hymn like inscriptions. This wasn't a vegetable to be feared in general, just one that demanded respect on a specific schedule. It was sacred when the sun smiled down. At night, not so much. You sit up now, brushing dust from your linen robe. A gentle wind picks up, carrying with it the warm, sweet smell of Nile mud and the faint incense trails of a temple altar. Somewhere, a temple cat meows softly, probably judging you. Behind you, the stone walls of the temple stand silhouetted against the dark. Somewhere in there, scrolls are locked in wooden chests. Priests are sleeping soundly on woven mats, and statues of men are quietly flexing their carved biceps. And here you are, crouched beside a vegetable that doubled as a holy object, a fertility charm, and possibly a nighttime trap for the spiritually careless. We're only getting started. There's more lettuce lore to leaf through, but for now, lean back into the quiet, breathe deeply, and let that sacred strangeness wrap around you like a linen sheet on a cool Theban evening. Still kneeling in this garden, you finally lock eyes with a statue of men perched nearby, half obscured by the papyrus reeds and moon shadow. He's got that smug half smile carved into his stone face, like he knows something about this lettuce that you don't. And he's not telling, but you're about to find out. Because Min wasn't just the lettuce guy. He was a very specific kind of god, strong, stoic, always depicted standing tall in more ways than one, if you catch the drift. His cult was primarily centered in Akhmim, ancient Panopolis, and later spread to other parts of Egypt, where the vibes apparently remained fertile. You stand slowly, brushing your hands clean on your robe, and start tracing the tiled walkway that leads deeper into the temple gardens. Statues of men line the way like very stern garden gnomes, and beside nearly every one, lettuce, real or carved. This wasn't subtle. To worship men was to embrace the awkward intimacy of agricultural symbolism. He wasn't shy about what he represented: life force, generative energy, and the idea that nature is very productive when it's in the mood. Here's the kicker: Mayans festivals were notorious. They involved processions, wild dancing, ritual harvests, and sometimes, if the inscriptions are to be believed, athletic contests. One surviving text even references leaping for men, which sounds suspiciously like CrossFit, but with more loincloths. It was all very celebratory, very energetic, and always involved the ritual offering of lettuce. But not just any lettuce. Egyptian lettuce was tall, vertical, and oozed that famous sap when cut or broken. This wasn't salad bar fare. This was symbolically intense greenery. In some carvings, Min is shown with bundles of the stuff, as if to say, you know what this means. And yes, ancient audiences definitely did. Now, the interesting thing is that lettuce wasn't just linked to male fertility. It also played a role in funerary practices and broader concepts of regeneration. That's why you'll find it painted in tombs or even used in burial offerings. It wasn't just a nod to life, but to the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. You plant a seed, it grows, it dies, it returns. Same with people, same with gods. Deep stuff. But men took that symbolism and cranked it up to 11. Historians still argue whether men's use of lettuce was originally metaphorical, agricultural, or somewhere in between. Some think he was once a god of the desert storm, and fertility merged into one, sort of like a mashup track of two regional cults. Others suggest Min was always about reproduction, and lettuce just happened to be the best available visual aid. Fringe interpretations suggest the plant had pharmacological uses, maybe a mild sedative effect or ritual purpose that gave it a spiritual edge. One theory proposes that the latex sap contained small traces of compounds that, in the right dose, could induce a feeling of calm or even trance. Imagine that lettuce, the original chill pill, kind of explains why you're getting sleepy just listening to this, huh? But as you drift deeper into this garden and deeper into the history, something curious begins to unfold. You notice how the layout of the space centers around symbolic geometry, four pathways crossing like a solar diagram, statues placed at cardinal points, and always, lettuce growing in the easternmost plots where the sun rises. Coincidence? Unlikely. For Egyptians, symbolism was architecture, and yet the same plant that welcomed the sun was avoided at night like a polite ghost. Some say the priests feared Min himself might walk among the rows after dark, inspecting the plants, or perhaps using them as a conduit to channel his divine power. Others believe the lettuce, exposed to the moon, might absorb qualities not intended for human touch, dreams, desires, distractions. If you touched it, you'd absorb them too. A scroll fragment from Karnak Temple warns acolytes not to disturb the fertile greens, lest the god awaken within you. That's either a metaphor for temptation or an actual spiritual possession via lettuce. Either way, hard pass. A few steps ahead, a low stone altar rises between rows. Faded images are carved into the base, men standing proudly, surrounded by waving stalks and, one slightly wilted lettuce that appears to be bowing. Okay, maybe that's just erosion, or maybe it's lettuce performance art. Who can say? You run your fingers gently over the stone. The carving is ancient, but the feeling it evokes is oddly familiar. This idea that something simple, something natural, can be sacred, uncomfortable, powerful, and silly all at once. It's classic human stuff. We give meaning to the mundane. Lettuce becomes metaphor. Ritual becomes reality. And when night falls, we double those meanings. The divine becomes dangerous, the sacred off limits. So here you are, in the garden after dark, already breaking one rule just by being here. Somewhere, in a deeper chamber of the temple, the other priests are probably offering prayers to Ra or preparing incense for morning rites. They don't know you're out here, and maybe they wouldn't understand why you're drawn to this patch of leafy, strangely powerful plants. But you're starting to get it. You're not just walking among vegetables, you're walking among ancient symbols. You're tiptoeing between myth and routine, between what's real and what was once very real, to someone else. And you're starting to suspect that if these plants could talk, they'd have some very weird stories to tell. You crouch beside another patch of lettuce, brushing your fingers against the dusty soil. The moonlight glints off the leaves, slick and cool, while somewhere in the back of your mind you can almost hear the ghost of a priest gasping, "No, not the sacred romaine." Okay, it wasn't exactly romaine, but the idea stands. Tonight's garden stroll keeps getting stranger, and now we've reached what might be the most eyebrow raising part of the whole thing: lettuce sap. Yeah, we have to talk about it. The Egyptians weren't oblivious. They noticed the way lettuce, particularly the tall, wild variety, Lactuca cereola, oozed a sticky white sap when snapped or cut. In fact, they were very aware of it. The milky, latex like substance was seen as symbolic, and not in a subtle way, more like in an everyone is trying not to make eye contact way. That sap became shorthand for the life force of men. It was used in temple rituals. It was spoken about in euphemisms. It was, brace yourself, likened to divine emissions. Ancient Egyptian mythology didn't pull punches, and neither did its vegetables. You pick a leaf and watch as a thin bead of white slowly trails down the stalk. In the silence of the night garden, it feels excessive. Even the frogs seem mildly disturbed. Now, whether or not this symbolism was taken literally is still debated. Some scholars suggest it was more about the idea of fertility, using lettuce to represent natural cycles. Others think it was tied to actual medicinal or ritual properties. Ancient texts sometimes mention lettuce in spells related to virility or childbearing. So, yeah, it had a bit of a plant of passion reputation. But there's more. Some older sources suggest the Egyptians may have also used lettuce sap in embalming mixtures, healing salves, or even as part of ritual purging. Yup, lettuce was kind of the Swiss Army knife of mystical botany. Historians still argue whether these uses were widespread or limited to certain regions. The evidence is scattered, just like ancient lettuce seeds on the wind. You stand again, walking along the narrow trench between plots. The breeze has picked up now, carrying hints of dried herbs and distant incense. Somewhere inside the temple, a censer has just been lit. You smell frankincense, maybe myrrh, comforting, safe inside. But out here, in the moon soaked garden, things feel less certain. There's a story, half myth, half temple gossip, about a junior priest who touched the sacred lettuce after dusk. It's recorded in a marginal note on a funerary scroll. The boy, touched by the plant, was driven to confession. He saw things that were not of this world. Let no one tempt the plant of the moonlight. Was that just religious fear-mongering, a way to scare initiates straight? Or did people really believe the plant held nighttime power? Maybe the lettuce absorbed more than sunlight. Maybe it took on spiritual charge, or was seen as open to possession by certain gods. In the dark, all things felt possible, and maybe that was the problem. A small beetle scurries past your sandal. It's a sacred scarab, the kind ancient Egyptians believed could push the sun across the sky. Even bugs had symbolism here. You can't take a step in this place without stepping on an icon. It's exhausting. It's beautiful. You pause beside a raised platform where ceremonial offerings were once placed. Carvings show men receiving gifts, grapes, bread, and, there it is again, lettuce, lifted high in reverence. His eyes are wide, intense, like he's making very intense salad related eye contact. The accompanying inscription describes the lettuce as the verdant force of renewal, which sounds poetic until you remember what it meant in practice. Some rituals required a priest to touch the lettuce, recite a fertility incantation, then retreat immediately to bathe, touch and go in the most literal sense. And yet, as sacred as this all was, the lettuce itself wasn't immortalized in myths the way lotus flowers or papyrus were. It wasn't a poetic muse. It was more like a workhorse of religious fertility, a leafy tool in the great mystical toolbox. A few rogue scholars have even proposed that lettuce sap was seen as a kind of spiritual lubricant, used to ease transitions between life phases, puberty, pregnancy, priesthood, that sort of thing. Though, to be clear, this is mostly speculative and kind of weirdly phrased in academic papers. Still, the sap mattered. It connected the lettuce to the divine. And it created yet another reason why you just didn't mess with the plants once the sun was down. When men's energy wasn't actively being channeled in a daylight rite, the lettuce sat dormant, or so the priests hoped. Some even say the sap glowed faintly at night under certain conditions. No solid proof, of course, but it's the kind of story you hear whispered by temple guards who probably spent too many hours alone in the garden with nothing but the rustle of leaves and the judgmental gaze of carved gods to keep them company. And so, as you continue walking through this sacred plot, you find yourself oddly respectful of these absurdly loaded little greens. You've seen the carvings, you've read the warnings, you've witnessed the sap, and even though you know it's just a plant, something deep inside you says, don't touch it again. You've officially decided no more touching the lettuce, not even a light graze. You tuck your hands into your sleeves like a penitent monk with salad trauma. Because as weird as it sounds, this garden now feels less like a vegetable patch and more like a living altar, lush, alert, and strangely aware of you. And the rules? Oh, they're written in silence, shadow, and some extremely passive aggressive temple scrolls. It's time to talk about why priests weren't allowed near lettuce after sunset. Sure, we've skimmed the surface already. Sacred symbolism, divine fluids, lurking moon spirits, but now we're going deeper. Temple deep, rulebook deep. You follow a narrow sandstone path toward a low wall etched with glyphs. The carvings are worn but readable. A figure bows before a row of upright lettuce, offering incense with eyes averted. The caption, scrawled in the precise, tidy script of a temple scribe, reads something like, "The breath of men is not for the dusk." Mysterious, and definitely not comforting. See, Egyptian priests lived under a strict regimen. Their entire lives were governed by purity laws that rivaled the pickiest skincare routines of TikTok beauty influencers. Daily rituals included multiple baths, complete hair removal everywhere, dietary restrictions, abstinence, and scheduled offerings. Even their dreams were monitored. Some temples had interpreters to analyze what priests saw during sleep. So when temple documents say, Do not go to the sacred garden after sunset. It wasn't just a suggestion, it was a sacred boundary, like an ancient do not disturb sign, but for cosmic forces and judgmental lettuce. The official reasoning, darkness was the domain of uncertainty. The sun god Ra had journeyed into the underworld, leaving the earthly realm under the watchful eye of lunar and chthonic deities. Purity, in this dim time, was tenuous. Priests, meant to be vessels of light and order, were warned to avoid places where things might get weird. Historians still argue whether these rules applied to all temple gardens or just the ones associated with men. Some believe the restriction was seasonal, only during certain moon phases or fertility festivals. Others argue it was linked to energy cycles, like astrological hotspots for ancient lettuce vibes. A quirky tidbit buried in the scroll of the 20 fingers, don't ask, mentions an elder priest who insisted lettuce sings to the moon. This was either metaphorical or the man was suffering from extreme dehydration. Fringe theory, he might have eaten it raw and hallucinated his way into early retirement. And here's the thing, some of the restrictions were about what you might do around lettuce, not just what the plant might do to you. Imagine you're a young priest, fresh off your fourth ceremonial bath of the day. You're spiritually charged, emotionally repressed, and wandering a warm, fragrant garden full of symbolic fertility icons. There's no Wi Fi, no YouTube. Your mind wanders. Temple authorities knew this. So rather than risk anyone getting too spiritually frisky around a crop linked to divine reproduction, they banned nighttime garden strolls entirely. But there's another lesser known wrinkle. You round a corner and spot an old stone bench nestled beneath a sycamore fig. Just beyond it, a series of clay tablets are stacked in a shaded alcove. One tablet, cracked down the center, bears a short poem in faded paint. When the moon kisses leaf and stalk, let no servant linger, let no shadow walk. For men's garden is not for dreams. It pulses with more than what it seems. It's beautiful, haunting, slightly threatening. Classic ancient Egyptian poetry. You take a seat on the bench and exhale. The air is thick with that earthy, nighttime bloom scent. Every rustle of leaves now feels loaded. Even the chirp of a distant night bird makes you flinch slightly. This garden isn't just a place, it's an atmosphere, a ritual in landscape form. The restrictions weren't just about lettuce, of course. There were taboos around many sacred plants. Lotus flowers at dusk, certain types of reeds during eclipses, onions on festival days, apparently too stinky for Ra's nose. But the lettuce, that one got special treatment. Why? Because it blurred too many lines. It was food and sacrament, symbol and offering, comic and cosmic. And at night, that ambiguity doubled. It became harder to define, and in a world where divine order mattered, that kind of uncertainty was downright dangerous. There's a theory that some priests believed lettuce took on a kind of divine inversion at night. A sacred plant by day, it became a spiritual liability after dark. Not evil, exactly, just unpredictable. The same way the Nile could bless you with fertile soil or flood your entire district. Divine, yes, but also chaotic. One obscure ritual text from the Temple of Esna reads, "The lettuce at night bears no name, It speaks with the voice of those buried. That line chills, absolute chills. Also, 100% the title of an indie horror film I'd absolutely watch. But to the priests, it wasn't just spooky metaphor. It was a serious boundary, a warning. And you, dear bedtime explorer, are breaking it. Still, no lightning has struck, no wrathful gods have appeared in clouds of lettuce-scented doom. Maybe you're safe, or maybe the lettuce is watching, waiting, photosynthesizing something weird into your dreams. Either way, you can't deny the strange magic of this place, the way the ordinary becomes extraordinary just by adding a few centuries and a heavy dose of moonlight. You lean back, close your eyes, and listen. Crickets hum. The wind sighs through the rows of plants, and the garden, this sacred, slightly unhinged salad bar of the gods, waits in silence. You're still on the bench, cloaked in moonlight and suspicion. The lettuce rows rustle softly in the breeze, and you've officially reached the part of the night where everything feels a little too alive. The leaves seem to shimmer. The shadows between stalks seem to lean in. And you're about to learn what ancient Egyptians thought lettuce got up to once the sun dipped below the horizon. Because this wasn't just about priestly rules or temple politics. No, tonight's story gets a whole lot more mythical. Welcome to the realm of botanical mischief and moonlight myths. You may want to scoot over and make room on that bench for some supernatural lettuce lore. First things first, Egyptians weren't the only ones who saw nighttime as suspicious. Many ancient cultures believed certain plants to transformed after dark. In Greece, the poppy became dangerous. In India, tulsi was never plucked at night. And in Egypt, lettuce got its own bedtime personality. Lettuce, by day, was fertile, controlled, tame, but at night, that was when its connection to men was said to wake up, and not in a calm, meditative way, in a may trigger prophetic dreams or fertility related accidents kind of way. You glance back toward the temple gates, still closed, still quiet, but the garden, it's humming, literally. There's a low insect buzz, cicadas maybe, rising in waves around the lettuce plots like a chorus preparing for Act 2, which is perfect because this section is full of drama. Let's start with the tale of the moon slumber lettuce. It appears in a fragmented tale recorded on ostraca, those little pottery shards priests love to scribble on. The story goes that a young gardener once fell asleep in a lettuce patch under a full moon. When he woke up, he claimed to have received a vision from Min himself, instructions for a ritual involving 12 reeds, 3 fish, and a dish of honeyed onions. Naturally, the temple elders were concerned, mostly because no one had authorized the fish budget. Was the gardener delirious, lying, or had the lettuce actually served as a conduit for divine dreams? Historians still argue whether these stories were morality tales or genuine beliefs, but it's clear that lettuce at night was seen as active in a way it wasn't during the day. Some temple records describe nighttime plants as whispering, which might be poetic, or just a result of the wind rustling through stalks. One late period scroll from the Temple of Khnum notes that the greens of Min sway with unseen breath when Ra has vanished. It's all very poetic and mildly terrifying. Now, we need to talk about the full moon theory. According to some obscure texts, lettuce absorbed lunar energy the same way solar deities absorbed sunlight. And just like Ra's rays could imbue objects with sacred power, so too could the silvery light of the moon, but it was a different kind of power: feminine, fluid, mysterious, and in some cases, mischievous. You remember that one leaf you touched earlier? The one that felt unusually cool, even under the warm night air. That might have been exactly the kind of plant these myths warned about. One fully charged with lunar energy, carrying all the symbolic baggage of Min, plus a sprinkle of moon magic mischief. A supernatural salad, if you will. And then there are the night voices. Several priests' journals describe hearing whisper like sounds near lettuce plots after dark. One dramatic entry from a priest named Jed Konsu reads, "In the third hour of night, I passed near the garden and heard the rustling chant. The leaves shifted though there was no wind. I fled." Historians still argue whether Jed Konsu was prone to embellishment or had simply skipped dinner and hallucinated a lettuce choir. You shift slightly on the bench. It's hard not to notice how the plants seem to respond to your attention. They don't move, of course not, but somehow their stillness feels deliberate. And if the lettuce had opinions, they were certainly keeping them to themselves. There's even a fringe belief found in an Upper Egyptian folk tale that lettuce, when fully awakened under moonlight, could reveal secrets. Ancient lovers allegedly snuck into gardens to whisper names into the plants, hoping the lettuce would carry their confessions to the gods or to their crushes. Nothing says romance like leafy green gossip, but not all the stories were sweet. One tale warns of a priest who defied the temple's garden curfew. He ventured in under a new moon and tried to harvest a sacred head of lettuce for a private ritual. The next morning, he was found catatonic, staring at the same lettuce, eyes wide, unblinking. "The plant saw into me," he later muttered, and was never quite right again. Moral of the story: don't mess with mystical produce. You rise from the bench now, feeling oddly reverent. You're not afraid exactly, but you are aware that this garden and its crisp, symbolic contents holds more than just chlorophyll. It holds meaning, history, power, maybe even a few unspoken dreams drifting between the rows. And you understand now why priests stepped lightly near these plots, why they bowed, why they washed their hands before touching even a single stalk. Because the lettuce, ridiculous though it may seem, was a channel, a bridge, a threshold between sacred and sensual, day and night, flesh and spirit. And at night, it crossed that threshold without asking. You turn slowly from the moon-drenched path and make your way toward the far edge of the temple garden. Something's different here, more structured, more solemn. The lettuce isn't planted in neat farming rows anymore. It's arranged in concentric circles, like a leafy labyrinth, and right in the center stands a raised limestone tomb marker, half swallowed by creeping vines. So yeah, now we're getting into the bit where lettuce, yes, the humble garden green, starts showing up in tombs. Tonight's curiosity: lettuce, guardian of tombs. The ancient Egyptians were nothing if not consistent. If something had spiritual meaning in life, you bet your linen wrapped afterlife it showed up in death too. and lettuce was no exception. It made appearances in burial chambers, funerary offerings, and painted scenes on tomb walls. A lot of this, as you might expect by now, ties back to our flexi fertility god men. But here's the twist. In tombs, lettuce wasn't just about virility, it was about rebirth. You circle the strange burial marker, brushing past a particularly bold lettuce that seems to lean in your direction. Don't flatter yourself. It probably sways that way for everyone. This particular plot, likely symbolic. Some temple complexes included mock tombs or cenotaphs, empty grave markers meant to honor gods, heroes, or particularly memorable priests who didn't get a proper burial. In spaces like these, lettuce was planted to reflect eternal life, cycling fertility, and the promise that even the dead could sprout again, metaphorically speaking. One of the most famous depictions of lettuce in funerary art comes from the tomb of Senefer in Thebes. His burial chamber, nicknamed the Tomb of the Vineyards, features lush scenes of grapevines and rows of stylized lettuce, each one standing like a soldier of rebirth. Imagine going to your final rest surrounded by salad. Historians still argue whether this tomb lettuce was literal, planted nearby, or artistic, painted on walls to imply a sacred garden. But either way, the message was clear. Lettuce was about more than fertility. It was a metaphor for the afterlife. There's even evidence that lettuce juice or extract was part of embalming rituals. Though not as common as resins or natron salts, some embalming texts mention the sap of renewal, which a few scholars believe refers to lettuce latex. Again, symbolic. The idea was to coat the body with a substance representing the life force, as if giving the deceased a little green power boost to get through the underworld. And let's not forget, Min himself wasn't just a fertility god. He was also seen as a protector of travelers, including those traveling through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. So placing lettuce near a tomb, that's like slipping your spirit a backstage pass through the scariest subway system imaginable. Now here's the quirky twist. There are records, just a few, but enough to raise eyebrows, of tombs lined with actual lettuce leaves or stalks at burial. Think of it like a spiritual garnish, or a very determined side salad. One high priestess in the 18th dynasty had lettuce packed into small woven baskets and placed at the four corners of her coffin. Why? No clear inscription explains it, but fringe theorists, you know them, bless their chaos, suggest it was meant to ward off infertility in the next life. A sort of metaphysical insurance policy. But it gets even more curious. Some rural tombs, especially in Lower Egypt, have been found with clay seed pots buried beside the body, filled with dried lettuce seeds. The hope? That the seeds would grow in the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise, allowing the deceased to enjoy a lush garden of their own in eternity, which is both sweet and deeply specific. You trail your fingers across a crumbling cartouche carved into the stone. The name is mostly worn away, but a small glyph of a lettuce leaf remains clear right beside a determinative for eternity. It's a subtle mark, probably missed by casual passers-by. But not you, because by now you get it. To modernize, the idea of lettuce in tombs might seem silly. But to the ancient Egyptians, symbolism mattered. Everything had meaning. Every item in a tomb, every glyph, every stalk of green, it all built a story of who that person was and what they hoped for in the world beyond. And in that world, apparently, you'd better pack some lettuce. You sit beside the tomb marker, the concentric lettuce rows circling around like a spiral galaxy. The air is still now. Even the insects seem to have quieted. You let your fingers trace lines in the dust, following the spiral inward. It's hypnotic, calming. Somewhere far off, the faint sound of temple bells marks the passing of the fourth hour of the night. In this moment, it's easy to believe what the ancients believed, that death wasn't the end, just another planting season, and lettuce, with its swift growth, regenerative properties, and all too symbolic sap, was the perfect emblem of that hope. So, yeah, maybe priests feared it at night, but they still buried it with their dead. Respect. You brush the dust from your palms and rise slowly, leaving behind the concentric lettuce spiral and its silent tomb guardian. A soft wind stirs the air again, curling through the garden rows like a polite ghost looking for a nap spot. And you're about to get a crash course in ancient Egyptian hygiene that'll make your overpriced face wash cry. Let's talk about the great priestly cleanliness obsession and how lettuce, awkwardly, fit into it. Now, you've probably gathered by now that ancient Egyptian priests were the OG clean freaks. These weren't your average dusty robed temple dudes lounging around in a divine funk. No, these guys bathed multiple times a day, shaved every inch of their bodies, yes, even there, avoided garlic and onions to keep their breath non offensive to the gods. Basically, if Purell had existed in 1300 BCE, it would have been in golden dispensers next to every altar. Why? Because priests weren't just regular people, they were vessels for the divine, walking representations of purity. And if there's one thing Egyptian deities couldn't stand, it was mess. This obsession wasn't limited to the body. It extended to their clothes, tools, food, and even what they were allowed to touch. Which brings us back to our leafy old frenemy, lettuce. You stroll past a ceremonial water basin, a big, shallow stone pool that priests used for ritual cleansing. The water's still, moonlit, and probably a few centuries past its expiration date, but you can imagine what it once looked like, constantly refilled, constantly used, constantly monitored. A sacred spa, if you will. And right beside it, a small plot of, you guessed it, lettuce. See, some temple texts describe priests using lettuce in purification rites, not to wash with it, because ew, but to symbolize the restoration of purity after an impure event. A mistake in the liturgy, a poorly timed yawn during a sunrise chant, accidentally seeing a married couple hold hands in public, scandalous. The idea was this: just as lettuce grows quickly, straight, and untainted by the dirt around its roots, their words, not ours, it was seen as a visual reminder of rebirth and spiritual reset, which is sweet, until you remember the other symbolic stuff we talked about in section 4. Yes, it's still that lettuce. So you have this weird tension now. On one hand, lettuce is pure, holy, cleansing. On the other hand, it's the botanical embodiment of a god who never skips leg day and radiates Jim Bro energy. It's a leafy paradox. Historians still argue whether priests actually used lettuce in any physical part of their hygiene rituals or whether it remained strictly symbolic. Most agree that by late New Kingdom periods, lettuce was more about metaphor than method. But scroll fragments found in Saqqara hint that some priests may have carried lettuce leaves tucked into their sashes during purification rites, kind of like a floral badge of honor. A fringe theory, because there's always one, claims that lettuce was used to scent priestly linens. The idea is that the leaves, when crushed slightly, release a faintly bitter but fresh scent, something that kept garments smelling temple ready. This theory is hotly debated, mainly because it's based on a single line from a very poetic laundry list. And then there's the taboo side, because here's the twist: lettuce could make you unclean too. If touched at the wrong time, like after dark, or if handled without the proper chant or preparation, it wasn't just a plant anymore. It became spiritually risky, not defiling in a gross way, but in a you just crossed an invisible spiritual tripwire kind of way. One particularly dramatic passage from the Temple of Edfu says, "He who enters the garden unwashed shall carry the weight of men's breath." I don't know what men's breath smells like, but it can't be good. You've been to examine one of the lettuce plants growing near the old purification basin. It's smaller than the others, leaves tighter and more compact. It almost looks shy. You wonder if this one was planted deliberately as part of a cleansing ritual, or if it just happens to be the garden introvert. Nearby, a half collapsed scroll shed edifice offers more clues. Inside, under a pile of clay seals, you spot fragments of linen inscribed with small hieratic characters. A prayer for cleanliness, addressed to the God who watches through the leaves. Creepy, but also strangely comforting. It seems that lettuce, for all its contradictions, was never just a salad ingredient. It was a mirror for priestly ideals, discipline, renewal, restraint, and the constant effort to stay spiritually aligned in a chaotic world. And let's not forget that priests, despite all their rituals and robes and lettuce anxiety, were still human. They probably got hungry. They probably got curious. And more than one likely eyed the forbidden garden after dark and thought, how bad could it be? Some scrolls mention a secondary rite, a ceremonial re-cleansing after accidental contamination. A lettuce-related mistake, perhaps. The mind races. You leave the purification basin behind and wander back toward the temple corridor. The walls are smooth and cool, carved with neat little scenes. Gods, offerings, celestial boats, and, you guessed it, one awkwardly triumphant depiction of a priest holding a head of lettuce aloft like he just won Best Produce at the Divine Farmers Market. Clean, pure, solemn, and still holding a vegetable. And you? You're starting to see just how complicated that one little plant really was. You're back beneath the stars, drifting slowly between the garden rows, your feet stirring up tiny puffs of dry earth. The lettuce glistens faintly in the moonlight, as if it knows what you're thinking. And honestly, you're thinking about lunch. Because here's the real question: was anyone actually eating this stuff? Welcome to the curious tale of the dream of eating it raw. Now, before we go any further, yes, the Egyptians absolutely did eat lettuce. but not all lettuce, and definitely not at all the time, especially not the tall, men endorsed variety that's been looming over us like the leafy ghost of ancient fertility rites. That stuff was sacred, sure, but sacred like grandma's wedding china. It was for show, for ceremony, not for slapping on a sandwich. The kind of lettuce you could eat casually without risking divine side eye was the gentler, softer variety. Shorter, less aggressive, and not oozing anything too symbolic. Even then, it wasn't exactly common peasant fare. More like a once in a while treat, fresh, cooling, and mildly bitter. But here's the weird twist. Despite being consumed, lettuce was also rumored to be unpredictable. You pause near a cluster of slightly wild looking plants, their stalks longer, leaves curling at the edges. This isn't your chill grocery store lettuce. This is the untamed, possibly judgmental ancestor of the modern Caesar salad. Some temple texts describe this variety as loud in the stomach, a polite euphemism for what we'd probably call digestively ambitious. It's mentioned in medicinal scrolls not just as food, but as an herb with a range of effects depending on how it was prepared. Lettuce juice was prescribed as a sedative, an appetite suppressant, or even, awkwardly enough, a form of birth control. Whether any of these worked, historians still argue, but it paints a very chaotic picture of ancient mealtime. One physician's manual, found buried under layers of temple debris, warns, "Do not eat the sacred lettuce raw on festival nights. It provokes dreams and loosens the tongue." Oh, good. Sleep paralysis salad. Perfect. There's even a fringe tale, half myth, half cautionary bedtime story, about a priest who snuck a bite of sacred lettuce during a heat wave. He claimed it would cool him down, which it did, until he started speaking in tongues and woke up 3 days later under a storage altar with no memory of how he got there and an overwhelming desire to sing praises to men in falsetto. Moral of the story? Lettuce, not always snack friendly. Still, records show that some varieties were cultivated for consumption. The edible types were softer, harvested young, and likely served fresh with herbs and vinegar, at least when vinegar wasn't considered ritually impure. Egyptian cookery wasn't overflowing with salad recipes, but lettuce definitely made the rounds, especially among the upper classes and temple elite who could afford to grow it in enclosed gardens. The average Egyptian farmer might not have had access to lettuce regularly, but they knew what it symbolized, and more importantly, they knew what it wasn't for. Midnight snacking in a sacred garden full of gods and metaphors. You kneel beside one plant, its leaves thick and deeply veined. You're tempted to snap a piece off, give it a taste, just to know. But then you remember the legends, the sap, the priest who woke up in a trance humming fertility hymns. Maybe not tonight. Instead, you reach into the pocket of your robe and imagine pulling out a piece of flatbread and some sesame oil. A hypothetical lettuce wrap. Symbolism on a pita. You chuckle under your breath. The lettuce doesn't laugh back. It just stands there, holy, suspicious, slightly smug. One thing's for sure, eating the sacred lettuce was not something done lightly. There were rules. You had to be ritually clean. The plant had to be harvested during specific phases of the moon. Prayers were said, incense was burned, offerings made. It was less grab a snack and more schedule a religious ceremony and maybe consult an astrologer. And yet, there's an undeniable allure to it. That forbidden crunch, that cold snap of moon chilled leaf. You can almost understand why someone might sneak a bite and risk the spiritual consequences. Almost. The garden is quieter now. Even the night insects have settled. Somewhere behind the temple walls, a distant gong marks the passage of time. Fifth hour of the night, deep dreaming time. You lay back in the dirt again, arms behind your head, staring up at the stars. Here, in this sacred lettuce grove, where raw consumption comes with celestial consequences, you finally realize something very Egyptian. Food was never just food. Every bite was a boundary, every plant a prayer. Even the simple act of chewing was a link between your body and the divine, which makes don't eat the sacred lettuce raw less of a dietary tip and more of a survival strategy. You sit up slowly, brushing stray bits of dry soil from your elbows, and gaze across the garden once more. The plants stand like quiet sentinels, casting long shadows in the fading moonlight. You've crossed into the deeper hours now, the part of the night when everything ancient feels just a little closer, a little heavier, a little more whispery. It's time to tackle one of the most curious intersections in this entire saga: women, lettuce, and lunar energy. Yes, we're going there, because while men may have been the deity most famously linked with lettuce and its vertical ambitions, women in ancient Egypt also had complex and occasionally deeply awkward relationships with the plant, especially under the influence of the moon. You wander toward the eastern edge of the garden, where a cluster of smaller, lower growing lettuces are planted around a shallow stone dish. It's cracked, worn, and decorated with a series of spirals. This wasn't for growing. This was a ritual site. And the rituals, they had some very specific gender roles. Let's start with Isis, the goddess of motherhood, healing, magic, and divine multitasking. While she wasn't explicitly the goddess of lettuce, thankfully, some lunar fertility rites dedicated to her involved offerings of young lettuce leaves. These rituals were often performed by women, especially during new moons, and were meant to promote conception, protect pregnancies, or help guide women safely through childbirth. But here's the part that would have made your local temple priest break into a nervous sweat. Many of these female-centered rites took place at night. Yep, the very time when lettuce was considered spiritually volatile, especially by the priesthood, was also when women were believed to be most in tune with the plant's mystical properties. This was more of a folk tradition than a formal temple practice, kind of like the ancient Egyptian version of cottagecore moon rituals. Historians still argue whether these rites were openly accepted or quietly tolerated by the state sanctioned priesthood. Some scrolls make vague references to women's gatherings under the waning eye, while others include no mention of female led lettuce rites at all. But archaeological finds tell a slightly different story. Amulets shaped like lettuce leaves have been found in female burial sites, and certain fertility charms are inscribed with lunar symbols and instructions to place upon the brow during moonrise. Quirky tidbit? Some midwives are believed to have rubbed lettuce sap along the wrists or forehead of pregnant women during labor. not as medicine necessarily, but as symbolic protection. The milky sap, once again, represented life force, and in this context, it was meant to act as a spiritual lubricant. Yes, you heard that right. For the safe passage of life from womb to world. You step lightly around the old ritual site. The stone dish has collected a shallow pool of dew, and beside it, carved into the floor, is a barely visible glyph, a woman holding a stalk of lettuce upright while a crescent moon hovers overhead. It's delicate, strange, and somehow deeply powerful. And that's the point. In a world where men dominated temple authority, women often had their own quiet, parallel traditions. Some operated within households, some were shared through generations, and some, like this lettuce moon connection, drifted on the edge of official doctrine, half sacred, half shadowed. You imagine a woman kneeling here centuries ago, whispering prayers, crushing a lettuce leaf in her hand, watching its pale sap ooze under moonlight, believing that in doing so, she might influence her fate, her fertility, or the safe arrival of a child. Fringe theory time. A few scholars believe certain varieties of wild lettuce may have had mild psychoactive or hormone modulating properties. Nothing too dramatic, but just enough that it may have contributed to the plant's mysterious, dreamlike reputation among women. Sleep aid, hormonal herb, the science is still hazy, but the symbolism, absolutely radiant. Of course, not everyone saw this as harmless. Some male scribes, bless their slightly panicked hearts, recorded warnings about moon rites among womenfolk that could disturb the quiet order of the gods. One papyrus suggests these rituals call forth dreams from the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, as if women chanting around a salad bowl were going to accidentally summon a minor demon with a leaf tiara. You reach out and gently tap the stone dish, feeling the cool stone beneath your fingers. Whether or not anything supernatural happened here, you can feel the weight of intention, the echo of ancient hopes whispered to moonlight and leaves. And suddenly it all makes sense. Why lettuce was sacred, why priests feared it, why women embraced it, why the moon had anything to do with a vegetable in the first place. Because the ancient Egyptians didn't separate the body from the cosmos. They believed your skin responded to stars, your bones listened to the tides, your breath carried the names of gods. And your garden, it was never just for food. It was a mirror, a message board, a temple in miniature. And sometimes that temple belonged to women who knew how to read the signs the moon left behind. You rise and step away from the dish, the dew catching a final glint before fading into night. Somewhere nearby, a moth flutters through a lettuce patch, silent and aimless. And you feel a little closer to the quiet power these women held, their rituals, their symbols, their midnight gardens blooming with meaning. You drift back into the main garden now, the lettuce rows humming their leafy silence, the moon riding high above like a silver plate polished for ritual. It's just past the 5th hour of night, the part of the evening when things start to feel too still, the kind of still that makes your skin twitch and your ears perk at every tiny noise. And speaking of twitchy ears, let's meet tonight's temple MVPs, the Night Watchers. That's right, the Night Watchers whispered warnings. These weren't just random dudes with torches. Temple night watchers were serious business. They were assigned to patrol sacred spaces while the rest of the priesthood slept. Think of them as ancient security guards, but instead of flashlights and clipboards, they had ritual daggers, amulets, and a healthy fear of salad. You make your way toward a low, crumbling gate that once divided the main temple courtyard from the outer garden. This would have been the starting point of the night watchers' rounds. Some would patrol the statue rooms, others the temple walls, and the unlucky few, they got the lettuce zone. According to a collection of temple duty rosters found in Abydos, the lettuce route was rotated among the junior watchers, often accompanied by older, more seasoned ones. A scribbled note on one of these rosters reads, "Take care on the garden path, the greens are lively." Whether that was a joke, a superstition, or a very subtle cry for help remains unknown. But the pattern shows up again and again. Lettuce zones were always considered sensitive, not just because of their association with men and fertility rites, but because strange things tended to happen there at night. At least, that's what the Watchers claimed. You pass a worn pillar bearing graffiti in Demotic script, casual, personal, priest adjacent chicken scratch. It says, "Heard rustling near the rows. No wind, no animals, just the leaves speaking." Creepy. Another, less poetic scribble on a bench edge reads, "Saw light in the patch. No torch, no moon." Creepier. There's even a short poem scrawled on a temple storeroom wall. "To the lettuce I bow, but not past the dusk, for it dances without feet and breathes without lungs." Historians still argue whether these were just late night jokes by bored guards or genuine accounts of supernatural experiences. After all, night watchers were expected to stay ritually pure too. Most wore protective amulets, especially ones associated with Thoth, the god of wisdom and boundaries. But there were also special charms for garden patrol, often shaped like tiny lettuce leaves carved in green stone. One such amulet, now housed in a museum in Cairo, has an inscription on the back, "Let no whisper reach me from the soil." Chill, very chill. So what were they afraid of? Theories abound. Some say the Watchers feared divine visitation, Min himself appearing in the garden, inspecting his symbolic offerings. Others believed in plant spirits, elemental presences that lived in particularly fertile or symbolically charged vegetation. There's even a fringe theory that lettuce rows became gateways after dark, thin places between the human world and the divine. One misstep and poof, you're being lectured by Osiris on cosmic etiquette. One of the juiciest fragments, found buried under collapsed storage rooms in Karnak, details a watcher's dream, or maybe a vision, or maybe a breakdown. It reads, "The rows parted, and he stepped forth, tall, green-crowned, eyes like no man's. He spoke not, but I knew. The garden breathes through us. I left my post. I left myself." It ends with the word forgiven. Cryptic? Yes. Possibly the result of too many desert heat naps? Also, yes. But the temple clearly took the whispers seriously. Certain scrolls list specific chants to be recited before walking the garden paths. Others forbid speaking at all while patrolling the lettuce rows after dusk. One even mentions turning garments inside out to confuse the spirits of men's garden. You reach a small stone bench, worn smooth by centuries of nervous backsides. This is where the watchers likely sat during rotations, close enough to keep an eye on the lettuce, but not so close that they'd feel watched back. Because here's the strange truth: even the watchers didn't watch the lettuce. Not directly. Too risky. Too symbolic. Too alive, maybe. Instead, they listened. They stood still in the dark, ears open, eyes averted, waiting for something that never quite came, but was always just almost there. You sit on the bench now, letting the weight of that idea settle over you like a warm linen blanket. The idea that the garden, at night, became a thing with presence, not evil, not malevolent, just aware, like it remembered every offering, every whispered prayer, every awkward ritual involving sappy leaves and cosmic intent. And you're not a watcher, but tonight, in this garden, you get it. You understand why the lettuce rustling made grown men flinch, why guards requested reassignment, why the quiet, leafy corners of this temple had warnings carved into benches and poetry scratched into storage doors. Because some things, even holy vegetables, become something else after dark. You rise from the watcher's bench, slowly stretching out your legs, still tingling with that mix of awe and mild lettuce-endued paranoia. Around you, the temperature's dropped. The air has a strange chill to it now, desert cool, but almost damp with something else. Something that feels engineered. And that brings us to our next oddly specific question. What exactly was lettuce doing in a desert, and how did it stay cool? Welcome to the very refreshing, surprisingly high-tech mystery of desert heat meets cold lettuce logic. Because ancient Egyptian priests didn't just plant lettuce, they cultivated it strategically, and that required serious horticultural know-how. Lettuce, even the sturdy, ceremonial kind, doesn't exactly thrive in blistering, arid heat without help. So, how'd they do it? You step lightly toward a narrow trench running beside a lettuce bed. It's a sebak channel, a kind of raised bed irrigation system designed to keep the soil moist while letting the surface to stay dry. Ingenious. And it's more than just ancient plumbing. It's part of a whole approach to thermal gardening. The Egyptians were masters of microclimates before that was even a hashtag. Temple gardens were carefully placed to catch the cool morning sun and avoid the punishing afternoon rays. Lettuce beds were sometimes shaded by papyrus screens or planted under taller crops that provided dappled light. Think nature's version of a salad umbrella. But it wasn't just about keeping the lettuce happy. It was also about keeping people cool, especially priests. Lettuce had a reputation for producing a cooling effect, not just physically, but spiritually. In medical papyri like the Ebers and the Kahun texts, lettuce is described as refreshing to the breath and a coolness upon the brow. It was used in poultices, juices, and ceremonial compresses, often placed on the forehead or neck of overheated temple workers or chanting priests suffering under layers of ritual linen. Fringe tidbit. Some healing rites instructed priests to sleep beside the cooling greens of men during fevers. That's right, temple lettuce nap therapy. Not a bad idea, really. But here's where it gets weird, because of course it does. Too much coolness from lettuce was seen as dangerous. You pass a small wooden sign, barely preserved in the dust, with faded red ink. The balance of the body is a breath, guarded from the chill of the plant. Ancient air conditioning meets mystical warning label. The concept ties into Egyptian ideas of bodily harmony. They believed in maintaining balance between opposing forces, hot and cold, wet and dry, active and passive. Lettuce, especially after sunset, tipped that scale. It became a source of excess cold. And too much cold? That could unbalance your Ka, the part of your soul that dealt with vitality and energy. So you've got this hilariously specific paradox. Priests used lettuce to cool off, but not too much. During the day, they might crush a few leaves and press them to their neck. But at night, that same plant was thought to steal warmth from the body, lower your protective energy, and leave you open to spirits of fog and sleep. No one knew what that meant exactly, but it sounds like the worst spa treatment ever. Some scrolls even recommend planting lettuce near windows at night to draw away the fever from within the chamber, which is beautiful, but also terrifying if you consider the lettuce as some sort of leafy soul sponge. You pause at a low wall and gaze across the rows. The lettuce here looks a little different, lighter green, shorter, possibly a younger variety. These might have been the medicinal batch. Temple doctors, called SWW, likely had their own plots for specific health rituals. An ancient medical recipe preserved on linen reads, "To treat the heat of the face, crush the leaf of the cool plant, mix with water drawn before Ra's first light, and lay upon the skin. Speak not during the placing." It's the skincare ritual of every temple TikToker that never was. But again, nighttime was the limit. One infamous case from the Temple of Kam Ambo tells of a priest who, during an especially brutal drought, snuck into the garden after dark and laid himself among the lettuce rows, trying to draw coolness from the earth. The next morning, he was reportedly found shivering and mumbling about moon hands pulling at his breath. Probably just heat exhaustion, but the scroll makes it sound way more haunting. Historians still debate whether these stories were morality tales, cautionary metaphors, or genuine medical lore. What's undeniable is that lettuce held a delicate balance in the minds of ancient Egyptians, healing in small doses, harm in excess. Kind of like espresso, even in funeral rites, this dual nature showed up. One priest's tomb inscription requested that cooling greens be placed at my feet, but not on my chest, lest my heart slow in Ra's eye. The lettuce giveth, and the lettuce taketh away. You touch one of the nearby leaves, just lightly. It's surprisingly cool, not damp, not dewy, just chill, almost too chill. And suddenly you understand. Lettuce wasn't feared because it was wild, or magical, or scandalous. It was feared because it was unpredictable. One moment, it soothed your temples. The next, it sapped your heat, disturbed your balance, whispered nonsense to your soul in the garden gloom, which is a lot for a vegetable. You step back from the patch, hands tucked once again inside your sleeves. Cool is good, cold is dangerous. Lettuce is both. And tonight, you're done playing temperature roulette with divine salad. You're starting to feel the pull of the garden now, not just physically, but mentally. The air is thicker, quieter. Your thoughts are starting to echo a little. Could be the hour, could be the moon, could also be the lettuce. Because let's be real, by now, you've spent a lot of time with these plants. You've tiptoed through their rows, eyed their sap, watched them sway for no reason. And if you're beginning to wonder whether a person could actually lose their mind out here, you're not alone. Tonight's tale, Did Lettuce Drive People Mad? Yeah, we've arrived at the unhinged scrolls, the whispered temple rumors, the case studies that smell like incense and red flags. The kind of stuff that didn't get carved into public walls, but absolutely got scribbled in the margins of private priest journals. You step into a small alcove beside the inner garden wall. There, nestled between stone blocks, is an old wooden cubby, once used to store scrolls, offerings, maybe even charms. And scratched into its frame is a simple warning: do not sleep in the patch. Well, that's ominous. The idea that lettuce could cause madness wasn't part of mainstream Egyptian medicine, but it does show up in bits and pieces, usually in stories where someone ignored one too many taboos and found themselves staring into the great cosmic soup of consequences. One such tale survives in the form of a half destroyed scroll, now called the Papyrus of the Unspoken Garden. It tells of a junior priest, unnamed, who entered the lettuce fields during a lunar eclipse. Why? No one knows. What happened? That's fuzzy. But according to the scroll, he saw the god not with eyes, but with blood. He touched the leaf, and it laughed. After, he would not eat, he would not speak, he walked only in spirals, whispering to the roots. Honestly, same. Whether this was a literal breakdown, a heat induced hallucination, or just very elaborate lettuce themed poetry, no one can say for sure. But the fact that the scroll survived at all suggests the temple took it seriously. Another more obscure source, a medical papyrus from Elephantine, includes a diagnosis that translates roughly to garden frenzy. It describes symptoms like insomnia, muttering, hot breath, cold hands, and a compulsive urge to water plants that were not there. If that's not a lettuce-induced spiral, I don't know what is. Now, historians still argue over whether any of this lettuce madness connection was based on real observations, or if it was just symbolic, a warning about spiritual overexposure. Ancient Egypt was all about balance, and too much time spent in sacred spaces without proper ritual preparation could be seen as dangerously destabilizing, especially when those sacred spaces were full of fertility plants known for sap and symbolism. But let's add a little fringe spice to the mix. Some modern ethnobotanists have pointed out that wild lettuce, Lactuca virosa, a cousin of the ceremonial Egyptian lettuce, contains small amounts of compounds that, when concentrated, act as mild sedatives or hallucinogens. In high doses, it can cause vivid dreams, disorientation, and nausea. Was this variety present in ancient Egypt? Possibly. Did the priests know what it did? Maybe. Were some garden induced meltdowns actually bad lettuce trips? It's not impossible. You move deeper into the alcove, where a broken statue base lies half buried in the sand. The feet of men, still carved perfectly in stone, point toward a now empty garden niche, Around the base, someone, centuries ago, scratched four repeated symbols into the ground: an eye, a leaf, a spiral, and a mouth. Interpret that how you will. There's even a late period amulet in the Egyptian Museum of Turin that depicts a priest holding lettuce in one hand and clutching his head with the other. It's believed to be satirical, a kind of divine meme. The inscription roughly translates to, "He thought he was prepared." But here's where things turn quietly profound, because madness in ancient Egypt wasn't always a bad thing. It could be a mark of divine touch, a sign you'd glimpsed something others hadn't. Prophets, oracles, visionaries, they all straddled the line between insight and instability. So maybe the lettuce wasn't causing madness so much as opening a door, one that wasn't always easy to close. You crouch beside a shallow pit lined with smooth stones, possibly an old offering well. Bits of charcoal and broken pottery litter the floor. Some of the shards have traces of green pigment. Ground lettuce? Crushed malachite? Hard to say, but it adds to the mood. This was a place where people made contact with gods, symbols, fears, and probably a few bugs. And you get it now, why the priests warned each other, why the watchers whispered about laughter in the leaves, why that one scroll ended with nothing but a drawing of a leaf and a single word: listen. It wasn't about the plant itself, not entirely. It was about what it represented: the mystery of life, the overwhelming strangeness of birth, death, rebirth, fertility, dreams, and divine obsession, all wrapped up in something that grew quietly under the sun and shimmered suspiciously in the dark. You run a hand through your hair, which is thankfully still attached, and breathe out slow. You're not losing your mind, probably, but you've definitely stepped into a headspace ancient priests knew all too well. And tonight, you're not laughing at lettuce anymore. You step away from the offering pit, letting your sandals whisper softly over the stone path as you emerge from the alcove and bake into the open rows. The moon is starting its slow descent now, stretching the shadows longer and cooler. Everything's quieter, heavier, like the garden's holding its breath for something important. And it is, because now we enter the radiant, crunchy heart of the story: the salad of the sun god Ra. Yes, lettuce wasn't just Min's plant of choice. It also had its moment in the solar spotlight, associated, bizarrely yet beautifully, with Ra, the sun god himself, which, when you think about it, is kind of poetic. One god representing the wild heat of day, the other the deep fertility of life. And in between, lettuce. You pause at a raised altar built of smooth white limestone, decorated with sun discs and faded images of Ra's solar bark, his golden boat that carried the sun across the sky each day. At the base, you guessed it, a carved relief of lettuce, stalks upright, leaves flared like miniature sunbursts. Why? Because even gods need side dishes. In temple liturgy, Ra was the god of creation, illumination, order, basically the ancient Egyptian CEO of reality. Each day, he sailed across the sky, bringing light and warmth. But when he reached the horizon, he plunged into the underworld to battle chaos through the night, only to rise again in triumph at dawn. This daily cycle of death and rebirth wasn't just cosmic myth, it was a ritual calendar. And in certain temple ceremonies, lettuce played a role in honoring that cycle. Here's how, during dawn rituals and solar temples, priests would offer up green gifts of the eastern field, usually wheat, barley, and yes, lettuce. The idea was to present Ra with the first fruits of light, the earliest crops kissed by the sun. Lettuce, growing straight and quickly in the eastern facing gardens, symbolized that burst of life at sunrise. But there's a deeper, stranger layer here, because Ra, while associated with clarity and light, also had a hidden face, Ra Atum, his elderly aspect, often invoked at sunset. And in those rituals, lettuce offerings became a symbol of return, of rebirth, of readiness to rise again after darkness. One text from the Temple of Heliopolis describes priests laying down a row of lettuce leaves at the base of Ra's statue just before dawn while reciting, "May he who has fallen rise upright. May the leaf call him home." That last line, literal chills. Historians still argue whether these dawn offerings were purely symbolic or if lettuce was believed to physically hold the first light. Some sources say the leaves were misted just before the sun rose to better catch and reflect the golden beams. Others think the sap itself was tied to the sun, the way it turned opaque in daylight and glowed faintly when warmed. You bend to examine one of the altar's side carvings. It shows a priest holding a bundle of greens in one hand and lifting a tiny sun disk in the other. The disk is resting on the lettuce, like the plant is physically supporting the celestial order. Is that metaphor? Is it ritual choreography? Is it ancient vegetable propaganda? Hard to say, but there's something undeniably moving about it. This idea that lettuce, so humble, so damp, so weirdly controversial, was the thing used to greet the sun. Even Min, with all his chaotic virility, bowed to Ra. Their myths occasionally overlapped, especially in later dynasties where religious ideas merged like ancient playlists. In some versions, Ra is the one who gave Min his lettuce, a sacred plant passed from order to fertility, from father to force. It's all incredibly symbolic and vaguely edible. A quirky detail found in a late period feast scroll during the festival of Ra's first rising, held just before the annual flood, priests would eat a single leaf of blessed lettuce after it had been left out overnight to drink the dew of Ra's approach. One bite, no more. Too much was said to overwhelm the senses. A bit dramatic for a salad, but hey, ritual is nothing if not theatrical. And then there's the myth of the sun's whisper, preserved in fragmented form on a collapsed temple wall in Edfu. It tells of a lettuce leaf that caught the first word Ra spoke after re-entering the sky, light. And in doing so, the plant became the tongue of the field, forever carrying traces of that power. That story became a basis for using lettuce in certain priestly chants, especially at sunrise. The leaf wasn't just symbolic, it was sonic, a receiver of divine frequencies. Basically, ancient cosmic Bluetooth. You glance down at one of the nearby plants. It's small, fresh, probably sprouted less than a week ago, and yet here it stands, silent and upright, just like its ancestors who once shared altar space with Ra's golden effigies. And suddenly, you see the cycle for what it is. Lettuce wasn't just fertility, or madness or feminine lunar power. It was continuity, growth, regrowth, a daily resurrection told in green. That's why it belonged to men. That's why it was feared at night. That's why it greeted the sun. Because lettuce was the bridge between gods, between day and night, order and desire, chaos and rebirth. And tomorrow morning, when the first rays of Ra touch the edge of this garden again, they'll touch these same leaves, these same symbols, carriers of myths long past, but not forgotten. The sky is still dark, but there's a faint silver blush at the edges now, just a whisper of dawn hovering beyond the horizon. You feel it in your bones, the subtle shift, the slow undoing of night's hold on the garden. And as the sun prepares to rise, we come to one of the strangest debates in all this leafy lore. Was lettuce actually an aphrodisiac or the complete opposite? Yeah, aphrodisiac or ancient anaphrodisiac. Because while men's very enthusiastic statues would suggest lettuce was, well, the vegetable of vibes, things get murkier once you dive into the texts. Some ancient sources practically shout, "This stuff sparks passion." Others, they warn that it snuffs desire out like a candle in a sandstorm. You pause near a low, square platform, a former offering table by the look of it. The edges are etched with scenes of men receiving bundles of lettuce, arms outstretched, expression stern. Definitely pro-lettuce, very much on Team Aphrodisiac. In fact, the very shape and sap of the ceremonial lettuce, tall, firm, milky, made it the poster plant for virility. You've heard this. You've seen it. You've tried not to think too hard about it. Ancient physicians even recommended lettuce for male health. One popular preparation involved grinding the seeds into a paste, mixing it with honey, and drinking it under the first light of dawn. This was supposed to fortify the loins, which is both a medical claim and the best band name never used. But then you flip the papyrus and boom, other sources say lettuce does the exact opposite. There's the famed physician Galen, okay, not Egyptian, but widely read in late antiquity, who classified lettuce as cooling and soporific, great for sleeping, terrible for passion. He wasn't alone. A few late Egyptian medical texts suggest lettuce dampens the flame of desire, especially if consumed in large amounts. One even warns against eating too much, lest the pulse slow and the spirit grow weary of pleasure. Yikes. Historians still argue over whether this contradiction comes from using different varieties of lettuce, or if it's more of a symbolic reversal, the same plant representing different things in different contexts. Sort of like how fire can warm you or burn your house down, depending on your vibe management. You step closer to the offering table, running your fingers across a glyph of men holding what looks like a lettuce leaf in one hand and a sistrum, a sacred rattle, in the other. It's all rhythm, growth, music, motion, a fertility ritual in 5 dimensions. But now consider this. In women's health spells, lettuce was sometimes used to stop conception. Certain birth control amulets found in burial sites feature lettuce leaves next to lunar symbols, suggesting a belief that the plant could cool the body, quiet the womb, or slow the rising heat of the blood. That's an ancient speak for don't get frisky. One fringe theory even posits that lettuce acted like ancient hormone therapy, symbolically or otherwise, used to either stir or suppress desire, depending on ritual context, timing, and perhaps how the plant was harvested. Crushed under moonlight, cooling and sedative, misted at sunrise and placed before men, potent and arousing. Two lettuces, one leaf. It gets stranger. In a love charm recorded in the papyrus Leiden, a line instructs, place the leaf upon the tongue of your beloved, that their heart may burn with longing. In another, lettuce is burned with myrrh and recited over, to make coolness enter the bones of the unfaithful. So, lettuce as both love potion and romantic extinguisher. You can almost picture two rival temple healers bickering. Lettuce restores passion. No, it kills passion. Then why is it on men's altar? Because it's symbolic. You're symbolic. Classic ancient drama. But really, it all circles back to Egyptian ideas of duality, balance, polarity, opposing truths that live in harmony. Ra and the night, Osiris and rebirth, lettuce as life giver and pleasure quencher. Depending on the context, a plant could be sacred because it held both powers, and that explains a lot. Why the priests handled it with caution, why it was planted only in certain places, why it was feared at night and revered at dawn. You reach into the garden bed and gently lift a leaf, just one. It's cool to the touch, a little slick with dew. It smells faintly bitter, a scent that's hard to describe, but immediately ancient. You imagine it being placed on someone's forehead during a spell, or slipped into someone's hand in the middle of a festival crowd. What did that leaf mean? Was it desire or detachment? The answer, as always with sacred things, is yes. It was both. You lower the leaf, placing it gently back where it came from. The first hints of sunrise now touch the horizon, bathing the edges of the temple in soft pink and orange. The garden begins to glow, and as the light returns, you can almost hear the lettuce exhale, like it's been holding in every secret of the night, and now it can finally relax. You stretch, smile, and think. Never thought a vegetable would teach you this much about balance, intention, and the ancient art of ambiguity. But hey, that's lettuce for you. The sun peeks over the horizon now, sending lazy beams across the cracked walls of the temple and painting the lettuce rows gold like some divine salad dressing just got drizzled across history. It's warm, but not too warm, sacred, but chill. And with daylight returning, so does our next story, one where things get political, dramatic, and mildly Greco-Roman. Buckle up, because it's time for the Ptolemies and their royal lettuce rows. Ah yes, the Ptolemies, Egypt's most theatrical dynasty. They weren't native Egyptians, but descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals. They ruled Egypt from the 4th century BCE down to Cleopatra VII. You've heard of her. And oh boy, did they love a rebrand. See, by the time the Ptolemies rolled in, lettuce had already been a sacred plant for over 1,000 years. But leave it to a bunch of Mediterranean aristocrats with philosophical obsessions and complicated family trees to take things next level. You walk along a row of slightly different looking lettuce now, taller, with broader leaves and fancier terracotta markers. This wasn't temple lettuce. This was court lettuce. According to palace records, the Ptolemies cultivated special garden spaces for symbolic plants, And yes, lettuce was right there in the royal lineup. But unlike the supercharged min lettuce of earlier dynasties, Ptolemaic lettuce came with a new twist: Greek medical theory. Enter stage left Hippocrates, Galen, and other ancient physicians who had opinions, about vegetables. The Greeks were really into the idea that food influenced your humors, your inner bodily balance of heat, cold, moisture, and dryness. And lettuce? Definitely cold and moist. So while Egyptians once offered lettuce to stoke the fires of fertility, the Greeks came in with their togas and said, actually, it's good for calming sexual urges. Total plot twist. Historians still argue whether this caused a sacred PR crisis. Did the Ptolemaic priests have to hold press conferences? Min's lettuce remains potent. Please do not use it to chill your libido. Probably not. But temple and court dynamics definitely shifted, because the Greeks didn't just bring their science, they brought theater. Literally. Lettuce started appearing in Greek Egyptian ritual plays and funerary dramas, particularly those honoring Adonis, the Greek god of beauty and tragic seasonal death. In these rituals, lettuce symbolized ephemeral life, quick decay, and the cycle of nature. Basically, beautiful today, wilted tomorrow. And guess what? They planted lettuce on the stage. During the festival of Adonis, women carried trays of rapidly growing plants, especially lettuce, as symbols of fleeting youth. Some rituals involved singing to the lettuce, mourning it, and then tossing it into the Nile. Very dramatic, very aesthetic. You pause near a sandstone basin once used for such offerings. The edges are painted with faint, fading vines. Above it, a partially preserved carving shows a royal figure, possibly Cleopatra herself, offering a stylized lettuce leaf to a blend of Egyptian and Greek gods. It's an artful compromise. Greek philosophy meets Egyptian mysticism over produce. But here's the real kicker. Cleopatra, the last Ptolemaic ruler and possibly one of history's best marketers, didn't reject Egyptian tradition. She leaned into it. She embraced Isis imagery. She participated in temple rituals. And yes, some sources say she personally oversaw sacred gardens that included lettuce, not just for eating, but for ceremony. So while some Greeks whispered that lettuce cooled desire, Cleopatra seems to have used it to channel power. One fringe account by a Roman historian claims she gifted Mark Antony with a bed of night-grown lettuce leaves, scented with balm and blessed in moonlight. Whether that's true or just ancient tabloid gossip, we'll never know. But the idea of royal lettuce as a romantic gesture? Iconic. The Ptolemaic temples themselves reflected this duality. In places like Dendera and Edfu, you'll find inscriptions mixing Greek and Egyptian deities. Men standing beside Dionysus, Thoth conversing with Hermes, lettuce stalks arranged like floral border art between the columns. It was a cultural remix of sacred botany. And those royal lettuce rows, they weren't just symbolic, they were political. Maintaining them said, "We belong here, we honor your gods." Also, we really like a dramatic metaphor about leafy greens. You run your hand along a nearby irrigation trench, smaller, more ornate than the others. It may have watered the palace gardens once, where sacred and symbolic lettuce grew side by side, basking in Mediterranean Egyptian hybrid sun. Somewhere between Min and Adonis, between desire and decay, lettuce had managed to stay relevant, adaptable, even fashionable, which, let's be honest, is rare for vegetables. And maybe that's the lesson of the Ptolemies. Power doesn't just come from conquest, it comes from knowing when to adapt, when to change the meaning of a thing without erasing what it once meant. A lettuce can symbolize passion or abstinence, life or decay, Egypt or Greece. You just have to know how to frame it. So you stand now at the edge of those royal rows, watching the morning sun stretch over both wild and cultivated leaves, sacred and theatrical, symbolic and edible. And you think, honestly, the Ptolemies knew how to plant an image. The morning sun is fully up now, dusting everything in soft gold, making the garden shimmer with a kind of sleepy reverence. You're not tired, though, not yet. The air is cooler in the shade of the walls, and you're still winding through lettuce lore like a well-trained temple cat. And speaking of winding, it's time to talk about matters of the heart. Today's theme, lettuce in love spells and breakups. Because yes, dear listener, even in the world of ancient magic, lettuce had a place in romance. Not just the please let me have a baby kind. No, we're talking passion spells, affection charms, binding incantations, and yes, breakup rituals. Imagine slipping someone a piece of enchanted lettuce to say, I'm just not spiritually vibing with you anymore. You step into a smaller, more secluded part of the garden. This patch feels different, more intimate. The rows are tighter, walled in on three sides, and there are traces of old clay amulet fragments scattered near the corners. You're in what the temple texts sometimes call the Whisper Garden. Not an official name, but definitely a real one. This is where things got personal. Unlike big public offerings to Min or Ra, this part of the lettuce saga happened in the shadows. Sata. In households, among healers, midwives, and magic workers. These were the rituals that didn't always make it into temple archives, but show up in spell books, in amulets buried beneath thresholds, or in the confessional graffiti left in shrine walls. Let's start with the lettuce of binding. A love spell from the Demotic magical papyrus says, write the name of your desire upon the leaf, breathe upon it 3 times, and bury it at the base of your threshold, saying, come to me with a heart like green stalks, fresh, bending, faithful. Simple, direct, lettuce-based emotional regulation. Some versions added crushed rose petals or honey, but the leaf itself was key. It represented the living heart of the person, a metaphor for vulnerability and openness. It also had a time limit. Once the leaf wilted, the spell was said to fade. Ancient Egyptians understood the importance of expiration dates in both salad and affection. You kneel beside a small basin with grooves carved into it, likely once used for mixing herbs and saps. Imagine someone grinding fresh lettuce, whispering a name, watching the sap ooze as they chanted under their breath. Not dramatic, intimate. Now for the flip side, the breakup lettuce, because for every binding spell, there was an unbinding ritual. One common technique, letting lettuce rot. A spell fragment found in an old linen pouch reads, place the names of both souls upon twin leaves. Lay them on a stone. As the leaves part, So too do the hearts. Break up magic, ancient style. Let the wind carry the message. Let nature do the ghosting. Fringe practitioners added extra flair, wrapping the leaves in red thread, placing them near incense smoke, or even dousing them in Nile water from opposite sides of the river. Symbolism mattered. And if you're wondering, yes, some folks took it personally. One scribal diary recounts a young temple scribe who was cursed via a lettuce leaf during an argument with a court dancer. The result? He developed a stutter whenever he saw her. The diary ends with, he did not approach the garden for 12 days. Honestly fair. Historians still argue over how widespread lettuce based love magic really was. Some say it was limited to lower class practitioners, folk healers, and domestic rituals. Others believe even temple officials used these spells quietly, away from official rites. The lines between public ceremony and private charm were often blurrier than we like to think. There's even evidence that lettuce leaves were used in matchmaking ceremonies. One particularly chaotic text describes a festival where unmarried women would throw a head of lettuce into a stream, watching which way it floated to determine their romantic future. Let's hope it didn't just spin in a circle. You walk slowly past a narrow doorway, more of a niche than a door, leading to a low-walled annex of the garden. On the floor, a single tile carved with two figures holding a lettuce leaf between them. Their hands don't touch. The plant is the connection. Above them, a hieroglyph for breath. Because to ancient Egyptians, love wasn't just an emotion, it was movement, life, fertility, spiritual exchange, a connection that pulsed like the sap inside a sacred plant. Lettuce became a symbol for the space between people, vibrant, brief, and sometimes bittersweet. And that's what makes it perfect for love spells. Because lettuce wilts, it doesn't last. It demands tending. It's honest about its shelf life. You settle onto a stone bench, fingers tracing the faded love glyphs carved into the armrest. Above you, bees buzz lazily around the flowering edges of the garden. The air smells like mint and memory, and you wonder how many whispered names were folded into lettuce leaves here. How many hearts leaned into that green silence, hoping for closeness or release? You smile quietly, because even in breakups, the ancient Egyptians kept it poetic. And lettuce? Lettuce was the letter they sent. You rise from the bench slowly, as if the air itself has grown a little heavier with all the whispered heartbreak. The garden's changed again, less dreamy now, more grounded, more practical. You step between two stone columns, the shade cooler here, and catch the scent of something pungent, sweat, oil, maybe incense gone wrong. Welcome to the more functional side of lettuce worship. Brace yourself. It's time for animal sacrifices and side salads. Yeah, you didn't misread that. Because while we've talked a lot about symbolism and spiritual vibes, ancient Egyptian rituals often included real, tangible, sometimes messy elements, and that meant animal sacrifice. Not every day, and not in every temple, but when big ceremonies went down, offerings were made. And lettuce? Lettuce was often right there, awkwardly third wheeling between a goat and a libation jar. You're in what was likely the offering court now. Flat stones stained from centuries of use, a recessed basin nearby where blood would have been poured and washed down a ritual drain. But beside the serious altar space, you spot it, an ornamental niche where sacred plants were laid, not as decoration, as accompaniment. Because the Egyptians didn't just sacrifice animals to please the gods, they curated the moment. Each part of the offering told a story. A duck might symbolize flight or swiftness, a calf might stand for strength, and the lettuce, that symbolized life force, renewal, the green breath of the earth. So, what did it mean when you paired a bull with lettuce? You were making a cosmic sandwich, basically. Here is our strength and our fertility. Here is blood and sap. Together, we return it to you, O gods, that you may give it back tenfold. And no, they didn't mix the two on the same plate, like some divine barbecue platter. They were laid separately, but side by side, balanced, symbolic. Lettuce wasn't eaten, it was placed carefully, reverently, as if to say, this is the part that isn't dead. This is the part that still grows. Some temple inscriptions even describe lettuce as the vegetal witness to sacrifice, a leafy legal observer, if you will. One text from the Temple of Esna reads, lay the greens upon the altar, that they may see and remember, for blood speaks, but so does sap. Fringe historians, the fun ones, suggest that lettuce was believed to absorb the energy of the moment, that by placing it next to a fresh sacrifice, the plant might catch some of the vitality, the spiritual potency, and be reused in later rituals. Not unlike recharging a crystal if you're into that kind of thing. And here's where it gets more ceremonial and weirder. Some festivals involved lettuce only offerings. No animals, no incense, just bundles of greens piled high, soaked in water, and waved over statues. This was common during fertility festivals, especially when priests wanted to evoke life without taking life. A greener, gentler worship. But in festivals involving Min or Osiris, lettuce and meat often appeared together, sometimes wrapped in linen, sometimes dyed with red ochre to mimic blood. One particularly intense inscription from Karnak describes an offering in which the green of Min meets the breath of the lamb, followed by a chant to unite the powers of leaf and limb. You pause at a rectangular stone slab once used as a dressing table. No, not for people, but for animals. It was here that sacrificial creatures were purified, rubbed with oils, and ritually calmed. A small trough at the side contains fragments of old bones and what looks like dried plant matter. Lettuce, maybe. Hard to say, but the combination wouldn't be unusual. Priests took these offerings seriously. Every item placed had a role. Lettuce may have symbolized life, yes, but in the presence of death, it reminded everyone involved of regeneration, of rebirth, of the fact that even after blood was spilled, something would rise green and alive again. There's a theory that lettuce was even used to cleanse ritual knives after sacrifice, not for sanitation, but as a symbolic wipe, absorbing the spiritual residue. One scroll mentions cooling the blade with the breath of Min. Sounds like lettuce to me. Unless you think this was a dry, overly serious moment. Nope. Rituals were events. There were chants, music, priests in gold-threaded linen chanting prayers as they laid animal limbs and lettuce stalks beside each other like parts of a very complicated spiritual charcuterie board. It wasn't grotesque, it was artful, ordered, a kind of divine culinary choreography that told the story of death, life, and the forces that moved between. And then they'd light incense, say the final blessing, and let the gods feast. Not in a literal sense, of course. The offerings would later be redistributed, burned, buried, or consumed by the priests, depending on the rite. But the presence of lettuce meant the life force never left the altar completely. Something always remained rooted. You run your fingers along the edge of the slab. The stone is worn smooth, but you swear you can still feel an imprint of paws, of hooves, of leaves. It's all blended together now, like history composted into meaning. And once again, the lettuce was there, watching, witnessing, offering green stillness in the middle of divine spectacle. Because even in the shadow of sacrifice, it was a symbol of what grows next. You leave the old altar behind and head deeper into the garden's farthest stretch, where the earth looks just a little less obedient. It's wilder here. The lettuce rows are less aligned, and the soil is cracked in odd, ripple-like patterns. A few scraggly plants lean off in crooked angles, and there's a strange hush in the air, like this corner of the garden doesn't quite follow the same rules as the rest. Welcome to one of the weirdest footnotes in lettuce history, the lettuce that grew upside down. Yes, that happened, or at least one priest said it did. You pause in front of a raised stone slab, surrounded by a shallow trench, likely a plot used for observing unusual growth patterns, or perhaps a controlled ritual experiment. On its edge, someone centuries ago etched a single, unnerving glyph, a lettuce stalk pointing downward, with its roots up and its leaves buried beneath. According to a fragment from the Scroll of the Earth's Breath, a priest named Nebumek once recorded an omen involving a batch of sacred lettuce that turned its face to the Duat, the underworld. In his log, he wrote, "Upon the seventh night of the lunar cycle, I found the greens not with skyward stems, but bent downward, as if retreating from light. Their roots breathed air, their leaves touched the undersoil. I did not speak to anyone for 2 days." Okay, same, Nebumek. That's unsettling. Historians still argue whether this was literal, some kind of rare inversion caused by unusual planting, or symbolic, a vision interpreted as a sign of cosmic imbalance. Was the lettuce actually growing upside down? Or did Nebumek just have a full-on sacred anxiety spiral after a poorly timed moon ritual? Fringe interpretations suggest the soil may have been disturbed by animals or floods, displacing the plants in a way that made it look like they'd flipped. Others believe it was deliberate, a priestly ritual where the plants were inverted as a sign of mourning or humility, kind of like wearing your robe inside out for bad news. But here's where it gets really wild. In the same scroll, Nebumek describes a dream he had the following night. A garden filled with inverted lettuce stalks, each one whispering his name, their roots glowing faintly with pale blue light. When he reached down to pull one out, it vanished. When he tried to leave the garden, his feet sunk into the soil. He woke up with his sandals missing. His fellow priests, being practical, confiscated his writing tools for a week and told him to sleep under the open sky. That was their version of rest and recovery. And yet, His vision wasn't entirely unique. Scattered references throughout temple documents mention the green that bends away from Ra, or lettuce that grows beneath, always in connection to omens or warnings. Some suggest this sign meant an upcoming drought. Others say it foretold temple scandal, divine disapproval, or a coming death within the priesthood. One particularly dramatic entry from a temple guard reads, "We saw them bow, not to the light, but to the dark below. The high priest fasted for 3 days." You step closer to a gnarled looking plant in this part of the garden. Its stem leans low, practically horizontal. It could be natural, it could be damage, or maybe it's doing something on purpose, trying to tell you something in that very slow, extremely quiet way only lettuce knows how. There's a spiritual undertone to this story, the idea that sometimes sacred things bend the wrong way, that the world tilts and signs flip, and what was once a symbol of vitality becomes a message of warning. In a society obsessed with cosmic balance, inverted lettuce was not just weird, it was bad news. Priests were trained to interpret these moments, to balance the sacred math. If the greens grew down, they'd burn incense until the leaves rose again. They'd chant until the soil released the grip of shadow. They'd redirect irrigation channels, draw protective symbols in the dirt, and sometimes even sleep in the garden overnight, just to reset the balance. Imagine that. Sleeping among confused lettuce, waiting for the world to right itself. Quirky sidebar. In some ritual calendars, there's a day marked as the watching of the roots. On this day, priests would inspect the base of all sacred plants in the temple garden. Not the leaves, the roots. It's one of the only documented times they cared more about what was under the surface, because that's where the truth was hiding, or growing, or unraveling. You brush your fingers through the dry soil, and sure enough, you find a small, curled root poking just above the surface. It looks fine, normal, which is honestly a relief, because if it had been pointing at the sky, you might have needed to call in a spiritual emergency horticulturist. So, what happened in Nebumek's garden that night? Maybe a strong wind flipped his crops. Maybe a confused gardener made a mistake. Or maybe, just maybe, the gods gave a tiny, terrifying tug on the lettuce, saying, "Hey, something's off." And the priests listened, because even when the symbol is silly, the meaning is serious. And when lettuce turns upside down, the world notices. You make your way back toward the center of the garden now, past the subtle chaos of the inverted lettuce, where the ground feels more settled beneath your feet. You're in the heart of it all, the place where the priesthood's highest ideals met the earth's deepest mysteries. You pause, letting your fingers brush against the edge of a stone pillar. It's cool and smooth, worn by time, and once it was probably covered in vibrant murals of gods and goddesses, endless rows of offerings, sacred plants blooming in ritual harmony. But now, the walls tell a different kind of story. Today's theme, lettuce in the afterlife. Yes, it's about to get even more surreal. When you think of the ancient Egyptians and their spiritual beliefs, your mind probably goes straight to pyramids, gods, mummies, and eternal life. They were obsessed with it, after all. The belief in the afterlife was central to their culture, and every aspect of life, Every meal, every step, every word was tied to this overarching vision of what happened after death. And where does lettuce fit into all of that? Well, in the afterlife, lettuce was one of the sacred plants used to feed the dead. This wasn't just about honoring the deceased with a funeral feast. No, it was more like offering a continuous spiritual meal that nourished their souls in the journey through the duat, the underworld. Lettuce represented life, rebirth, and vitality, qualities that the deceased would need as they traversed the endless journey through darkness and light, chaos and order. You stand in front of a massive stone sarcophagus. In ancient times, this would have been the final resting place for someone important, maybe even a priest. The tomb's interior is faintly illuminated by the soft light filtering through cracks in the stone. It's eerily quiet here. In fact, if you listen closely, you might just hear the faintest hum of something, like the air itself is full of whispers. Inside the tomb, along with the customary offerings of food, incense, and gold, there's often a small bundle of sacred plants. Among those plants, lettuce. A scroll from the pyramid texts describes the moment when the soul of the deceased enters the afterlife. May the offerings be fresh. May the plants bloom. Let lettuce be laid beside the deceased to ensure that their heart remains pure in the land of the dead. Now, this is important because the Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of a person's soul and that it had to remain light and unburdened as it was weighed in the afterlife. If the heart was too heavy, weighed down by wrongdoings, it was devoured by Ammit, the demoness. If it was light, it could pass through the trials and enter the next life. The lettuce was there to symbolically lighten the heart, not as a direct weight loss solution, but as a purifying element, something green, fresh, and alive to guide the soul toward rebirth. A tomb discovered near the Valley of the Kings even had an inscription that reads, "The heart of the deceased shall find peace through lettuce, and it shall rest in the field of reeds, fertile and eternal." The field of reeds was the Egyptian version of paradise, the afterlife's Eden, and lettuce was a plant that symbolized the fertility of that place. As long as there was lettuce, the deceased would never truly be far from the earth's sustenance. They would always be connected to life, even in the shadow of death. You trace your fingers over the carvings etched into the tomb's surface, imagining what the priests and mourners would have seen here centuries ago. The painted images would have been bright with color, the air filled with the scent of burning frankincense, and the soft murmur of prayers floating through the space. This wasn't a tomb just for burial. It was a place of transition, of passage. In some cases, lettuce was planted in small pots and placed around the deceased's resting place. Archaeologists have found tombs where, buried beside the body, a small, fragile lettuce plant would grow, perhaps not as a literal offering, but as a symbolic one. The plant would continue to grow as the deceased continued their journey. It would keep their spirit nourished, even in the dark corners of the duat. It's also worth noting that lettuce's association with rebirth made it a popular plant for protective amulets. These amulets, often inscribed with names and blessings, were placed on the mummified bodies or in the tombs themselves. In some cases, Lettuce leaves were even used in the embalming process, symbolizing the idea that the soul would remain alive within the body, protected and nourished for all eternity. But lettuce wasn't just symbolic, it had a real role in funeral feasts. When families gathered to honor the deceased, they often offered a banquet in the tomb. Lettuce would be one of the items placed on the table, sometimes laid out on a fresh bed of reeds, sometimes wrapped in linen, just as it had been in life. It was, in a sense, a way of inviting the deceased back for one final meal. You pause in front of a faded, worn fresco on the tomb wall, a scene of a banquet, with relatives surrounding a table of offerings. At the very center of the table, a head of lettuce, its green leaves shining in the painted light. The lettuce, it seems, was always part of the cycle of life and death. It was there for the birth, there for the death, and even there to preserve the memory of the person who had once been. Lettuce didn't just mark the beginning or the end of life in ancient Egypt. It marked the continuity, the flow of life into death and back again. And by placing it beside the deceased, the Egyptians were saying, "We honor the life that was, and we trust that life will continue in some form forever." So as you stand here, surrounded by this quiet space, you realize something. Maybe lettuce wasn't just a plant to the ancient Egyptians. Maybe it was a way of looking at the world, one that understood that growth, decay, and rebirth were all part of the same cycle, that the past, the present, and the future could all exist simultaneously in a single sacred green leaf. And that, in some strange way, is exactly what makes lettuce eternal. You step back from the tomb, taking a moment to gather your thoughts, the weight of the sacred lettuce stories still lingering in the air like the incense of ancient rites. The garden stretches out ahead, lush and untamed, with the soft rustle of leaves reminding you of how much there is to this place, this temple, this sacred ground where lettuce has played such a quiet yet profound role. But there's something else you're about to learn, something even more surprising. Lettuce in the labyrinths. As you wander further into the garden, your attention drifts toward an area marked by tall, imposing stone walls, a labyrinth. You've read about these structures in ancient texts, and you know they weren't just mere mazes, they were spiritual spaces filled with symbolism. Some were used for meditation, others for initiation rituals, but they all had one thing in common. They were traps. At least, that's how they were perceived by the initiates who walked through them. In some Egyptian temples, the labyrinth was a model of the universe, a reflection of the journey through the afterlife. Those who ventured through the maze were supposed to experience the trials of life and death, passing through darkness and light, being tested, purified, and reborn. But here's the twist. Lettuce was sometimes used as part of this labyrinth ritual. According to one obscure text, which is now housed in a dusty corner of a museum in Cairo, lettuce was thought to have protective properties against the disorienting effects of the labyrinth. The priests believed that the plant could offer guidance, perhaps not in a literal sense, but in a spiritual one. The leaves symbolized the path to enlightenment, the way to clarity, the green light that illuminated the darkness. The scroll describes how, at the start of the initiation, priests would place small potted plants of lettuce at key points in the labyrinth. Each plant was associated with a particular stage of the journey, first the innocent beginning, then the darker trials, and finally, the return to light. As initiates moved through the maze, they would come across these potted lettuce plants, each one placed strategically to offer them strength. In some instances, a priest might pause at one of these plants, pluck a leaf, and consume it in an act of purification, an offering to the gods for guidance and protection. It's as if the lettuce acted as a beacon, green in a world of shifting shadows. The leaf wasn't just for nourishment, it was an anchor in an otherwise chaotic, symbolic world. The idea behind it was simple, really. The ancient Egyptians believed that life, in all its complexity, was ultimately meant to bring clarity. The labyrinth, with its winding paths and hidden chambers, mirrored the confusing, twisting path of existence itself. But lettuce, with its soft, light form, represented clarity. It was an antidote to the confusion. You stop at one of the stone walls of the labyrinth. The air feels different here, heavier, but not in a bad way. It's like the earth is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The priests, when they described the experience, wrote that those who made it through the labyrinth with the help of lettuce would feel renewed, a little like stepping into a higher state of consciousness. They would emerge from the maze not just as people, but as new people, spiritually reborn, their minds more attuned to the divine. In some ways, the lettuce was the real secret of the labyrinth. It wasn't just a wayfinding tool or a physical guide. It was a symbol of the life force itself, a reminder that even in the most disorienting of places, there was always something green, something living, something to hold on to. At this moment, you feel like you're standing at the edge of that labyrinth yourself. The leaves all around you move in gentle ripples, as if in acknowledgement. The breeze picks up, and it's as if the garden is whispering to you, too. You are here. You are part of this story, as ancient and mysterious as it is. And the most fascinating part of all, this wasn't just some fleeting trend in the Egyptian worldview. No, the use of lettuce in labyrinth rituals was part of a much broader philosophy of combining the sacred and the everyday. Historians still argue about the labyrinth's exact role in Egyptian spirituality. Was it merely symbolic, a preparatory step in the initiation process, or was it an attempt to merge the spiritual with the physical in ways that only the ancient priests fully understood? Some believe the whole idea was a metaphor, a way of confronting one's inner demons before walking the path toward divinity. Others argue that the use of lettuce, specifically, was not just a spiritual guide, but a practical one. Maybe the leaves provided something mentally soothing during a stressful, complicated journey, grounding initiates in the present moment. Whatever the truth may be, there's something beautiful about the way this plant, this humble lettuce, was woven so deeply into the fabric of Egyptian thought. It wasn't just a garnish, it wasn't just a food, it was a spiritual compass, a ritual tool, and a symbol of life's eternal flow. You run your hand along the cool stone, feeling the gentle grooves worn into it by centuries of pilgrims and priests. In a way, you're walking through the same labyrinth they once did, following their footsteps, feeling the weight of their rituals, the subtlety of their teachings. You can't help but smile to yourself. Maybe you're a little disoriented. Maybe you don't have the answers to the ancient mysteries just yet. But there's something oddly comforting about being part of this long thread of human history, of walking in the shadow of priests who once saw lettuce as the key to understanding the cosmos. The ancient Egyptians were right about one thing. Lettuce, it seems, was more than just a vegetable, it was a pathway. And with that, you turn and begin to head back toward the center of the garden, the labyrinth now behind you, the lettuce ever present, green and eternal. As you exit the labyrinth, you feel a strange sense of tranquility wash over you, almost like you've just completed a ritual yourself. The garden stretches before you, still full of hidden corners and quiet secrets, but you're no longer in a hurry to uncover them. The lettuce has already offered its wisdom for the night. But, of course, it's not finished with you yet. There's one more piece of the puzzle to solve. Tonight's theme: the Pharaoh's secret lettuce garden. Yes, you heard that right. The pharaohs, those mighty rulers who shaped the fate of Egypt, had their very own secret lettuce gardens. These were places shrouded in mystery, tucked away from the prying eyes of commoners and even most priests. And within these hidden gardens, something even more unusual was growing, something with a very specific purpose. The pharaohs were known for their opulence, their ability to acquire and display the finest and rarest items in the land. But when it came to lettuce, it wasn't just about taste or symbolism. No, lettuce in the royal gardens was used for something far more delicate, something that combined the realms of luxury, spirituality, and, of course, health. You see, lettuce wasn't only revered for its connection to the afterlife, it had practical applications too, especially in the form of medicinal benefits. Ancient Egyptian medical texts, some of which are still translated today, talk about lettuce's use as a mild sedative. It was known to calm the nervous system, promote sleep, and even ease pain. And the pharaohs, always keen on maintaining perfect health and balance, were especially drawn to the calming effects of lettuce. Their private gardens were often cultivated with the most potent varieties of the plant, designed not just for ceremonial use, but for medicinal purposes as well. A text from the Papyrus Ebers, one of the oldest known medical manuscripts, describes lettuce as an essential herb in a sedative concoction. The pharaohs, perhaps tired from ruling an empire, would sometimes indulge in these calming drinks before bed. And it's said that, in their private gardens, they could walk among rows of lettuce plants, carefully tended to by specialized royal gardeners who knew exactly how to cultivate the plant for maximum effect. Imagine it: the sun setting over the Nile, the air thick with the scent of ripe fruits and herbs. The pharaoh, in his luxurious palace, takes a stroll through his private garden. He pauses beside a bed of lettuce, perhaps lightly plucking a leaf, feeling its coolness as it brushes against his fingers. This was not a casual encounter. This was a deliberate act. Lettuce, in this sacred setting, was more than just food. It was a tool to relax the mind and body after the day's exhausting affairs. Historians still debate the exact role of these lettuce gardens in the royal healing practices. Some believe the gardens were created specifically for the purpose of nourishing the pharaoh's body, while others suggest that they were places of ritual designed to prepare the pharaoh spiritually for the challenges of the afterlife. One particular legend claims that, In the years leading up to his death, the famous pharaoh Ramses II, known for his immense longevity, made regular visits to his personal lettuce garden. These visits, according to court doctors, were said to calm him during his last years, keeping him relaxed and in good spirits despite his frailty. As you walk along the edge of the garden, you can almost imagine it. Lush rows of lettuce glowing in the twilight, the pharaoh himself taking slow, deliberate steps, the soft rustling of leaves accompanying his every movement. The calmness in the air, the fragrant aroma of the leaves, was a balm to his weary soul, preparing him for the inevitable. But let's pause for the moment and think about the deeper symbolism of this practice. If the lettuce was indeed used as a sedative, it wasn't just a means of relieving physical exhaustion. No, in many ways, it was also a way to align the mind and body, preparing the pharaoh not only for the earthly stresses of leadership, but for the spiritual challenges ahead. The mind needed to be calm, clear, and light to enter the afterlife. This is where the philosophical side of ancient Egypt comes into play. The belief in the journey after death was not one of sudden, chaotic transitions. It was a gradual process. The pharaohs understood that they were embarking on a long, slow journey that would require immense focus and spiritual clarity. Lettuce, in its tranquilizing role, helped prepare them for that slow transition from life to the afterlife. But here's the kicker. It wasn't just the pharaohs who were obsessed with these calming effects of lettuce. As you've probably guessed, the royal priests, too, were in on the secret. Priests would often partake in the same rituals, wandering the pharaoh's gardens and drinking concoctions made from lettuce and other calming herbs. These rituals were not merely about physical relaxation, but about spiritual renewal. After all, these priests were the guardians of the sacred knowledge, the keepers of the afterlife's rituals, and they needed their minds sharp, calm, and ready for whatever the gods might demand of them. Some of these priests, it's said, would even meditate under the shade of the lettuce plants. There was something about the plant that was thought to facilitate connection with the divine. In the cool, quiet of the garden, the priests would focus their minds on the gods, invoking their blessings for the pharaoh and the kingdom. As you stand now, feeling the evening air shift and the soft rustling of leaves, it seems almost as if you've stumbled into the same space, a place of deep, quiet contemplation. The garden, with all its secrets, seems to be inviting you in. And yet there's still one more question. Why lettuce? Why not another plant? Historians still struggle with that exact answer. There's no clear-cut explanation for why lettuce became such a favored plant of the elite. Some theorize that it was because of its gentle, calming properties. Others point to its association with fertility, which was a key aspect of Egyptian spirituality. Perhaps it was the green color, often linked with growth, renewal, and life, that made it such a fitting symbol of continuous renewal. Whatever the reason, the mystery remains. Why was lettuce so deeply embedded in the royal and religious life of Egypt? What made it so significant that it warranted special gardens, special rituals, and special status? Perhaps the answer lies in the soft rustling of the leaves themselves, a reminder that in ancient Egypt, the line between the spiritual and the everyday was never quite as clear as we might think. You pause to consider this, standing among the quiet plants, feeling the weight of their meaning. You almost expect to hear the soft tread of the pharaoh's sandals or the low hum of the priest's chant as you stand in this place where past and present seem to mingle. As you continue your quiet walk through the garden, the setting sun casts a golden hue over the landscape. The world seems suspended in a soft, tranquil moment. The leaves of the lettuce plants shimmer faintly in the evening light, their once distant symbolism now feeling much closer, more immediate. You realize you've been standing here for longer than you thought, lost in the silence of the ancient rituals and stories that have unfolded around you. But there's still one more piece to this puzzle, a rather curious tradition tied to the powerful effect lettuce had on the ancient Egyptians, one that you probably never expected. The lettuce dream ritual. Yes, dreams. You see, it wasn't just the calming effects of lettuce that the priests and pharaohs cherished. It was the idea that lettuce had the power to influence dreams. And in ancient Egypt, dreams were considered more than mere figments of the imagination. They were seen as a bridge between the human world and the divine. The ancient Egyptians had an entire system for interpreting dreams, one that was so intricate and detailed, it often involved priests who were trained to decode these dreams. These dreams were not merely reflections of subconscious desires. They were messages from the gods, offering guidance, warnings, and sometimes even prophecies. It was a whole spiritual science designed to ensure that the pharaoh, and by extension Egypt, remained in divine favor. Lettuce, according to one set of mysterious records, was believed to have an intriguing influence on the dreams of those who consumed it before sleep. The plants were thought to possess the ability to calm the mind enough to invite lucid dreams, dreams that were particularly clear and vivid, as if they were gateways to the divine. Historians still debate the exact nature of these rituals. Were they simply an elaborate placebo, or was there a deeper spiritual effect tied to the consumption of lettuce before bed? There are records from ancient Egyptian medical texts that suggest lettuce's properties were more than just physical, they were metaphysical. The herb was associated with dream enhancing abilities, believed to guide the dreams of the user towards spiritual clarity. And the pharaohs, always looking for divine insight, took full advantage of these properties. In some cases, the lettuce was consumed as a part of a prescribed evening routine, specifically designed to bring about vivid dreams. The royal court physician would prepare a special blend, lettuce mixed with other calming herbs, in a drink that was consumed just before sleep. The pharaoh, now at ease, would drift into sleep, hoping to be guided by the gods in his dreams. Imagine this. You are the pharaoh, and it's been another long, demanding day of ruling over the greatest empire of the ancient world. You've dealt with politics, wars, and rituals. Your mind is heavy with the weight of responsibility, and all you desire now is peace. Peace for your body and peace for your soul. You retreat to your chambers, where a specially prepared lettuce drink awaits. The cool liquid, made from the leaves of the plant you've come to cherish, slides down your throat as you close your eyes. You feel the tension begin to melt away. Your body grows heavy as the calmness settles in, and you let the cool night air brush across your skin. Sleep soon takes over, and as you drift into unconsciousness, the vivid dreamscape opens before you. The dreams are unlike any you've ever had before. You find yourself standing in the presence of the gods, your every question answered with profound wisdom. You feel a sense of divine guidance, and it's clear this is more than just a dream. This is communication, a direct link between the mortal world and the realm of the divine. Perhaps this is what the ancient Egyptians understood, that the act of sleeping, of dreaming, was not just a time of rest, but a time for spiritual rejuvenation. And lettuce, with its tranquilizing effects, was the key to unlocking that deeper connection. This practice, while primarily reserved for the highest echelons of Egyptian society, eventually trickled down to priests and nobles. The belief in the power of lettuce to influence dreams spread, and soon private rituals involving lettuce became common among those who sought divine favor. You might even find records suggesting that ordinary Egyptians, fascinated by the idea of gaining insight through dreams, would partake in the same ritual, albeit on a smaller scale. But there's a more peculiar theory worth considering. What if the dream rituals were tied to the idea of divine protection? What if the lettuce drink wasn't only designed to bring prophetic dreams, but also to guard against nightmares? After all, in ancient Egypt, nightmares were often seen as omens of divine displeasure, or even as attacks from malevolent forces. This theory is based on a set of ancient Egyptian texts that talk about evil spirits entering the dream realm. The drink made from lettuce and herbs was believed to protect the sleeper from these malevolent forces, preventing them from disturbing the dreams or, worse, causing nightmares that could disrupt the connection between the pharaoh and the gods. Again, historians still argue about whether this theory holds any weight. Was lettuce truly seen as a protective barrier against dark forces in the dream world? Or was it just another calming, soothing drink to help the powerful rulers of Egypt relax and sleep deeply? While we can't be sure, one thing is clear: lettuce, in all its quiet simplicity, was not just a plant for eating or a tool for spiritual purification. It was a key that unlocked the door to the divine, a way for the pharaohs and priests to receive guidance, to receive peace, and perhaps to receive something even more valuable: a deeper connection to the cosmos. You stop for a moment in the garden, considering this notion. The sun has now dipped below the horizon, and the last remnants of daylight have faded into the twilight. The leaves of the lettuce are darker now, almost as if they, too, are preparing for the dream world that the ancient Egyptians once believed they could access so easily. And as you stand there, the weight of the night beginning to settle, you realize that maybe, just maybe, the lettuce wasn't just a vegetable. It was a gateway to something much, much greater. The garden around you is now a place of deep stillness. The world beyond the walls of this royal enclosure continues to bustle, but here, in this sacred space, time seems to slow. The gentle rustling of lettuce leaves is the only sound you hear, their very presence exuding a calm, as if the plant is not merely sitting in the soil, but acting as a quiet sentinel, guarding the secrets of ancient Egypt. At this moment, you feel as though you're standing at the edge of a deeper understanding. The mysteries of lettuce in this world seem infinite. But there's one final aspect that still lingers in the air, like a delicate fragrance you can't quite place. It's the role of lettuce in the rituals of death, a connection between the living and the dead. Lettuce and the pharaoh's tomb. We've already touched on the pharaoh's belief in lettuce's calming powers, but did you know that lettuce might have also played a part in the grand final journey, the afterlife? The ancient Egyptians, as you likely know by now, were obsessed with the afterlife. Every detail of their lives, from their daily routines to the way they dressed, had some connection to the world beyond. This connection didn't just end when the pharaohs died. No, they carried their most cherished items with them into the tomb. And some sources suggest that lettuce, along with the other plants, was included in the burial rituals. The idea was that the lettuce, much like the symbolic plants used in temples and gardens, had an important role to play in the pharaoh's passage from life to the afterlife. Historians still debate whether lettuce was directly placed inside the pharaoh's tomb, but there is one intriguing theory that you might find fascinating. Lettuce, as a symbol of renewal and life, was thought to act as a guide for the deceased. Just as the lettuce helped calm the mind during life, it was believed to help calm the soul as it navigated the afterlife. Much like the physical journey the pharaoh would take through the halls of the underworld, the plant was seen as a symbolic companion on the way to the next world. Let's picture this. The tomb is dark, but not completely empty. The pharaoh's body rests in its golden coffin, surrounded by treasures meant to accompany him into the afterlife. As you look closer, you notice something unexpected. Small bunches of lettuce, carefully wrapped and placed beside him. These weren't just casual offerings, they were part of a carefully orchestrated ritual. Some believe that the lettuce was meant to symbolize the restoration of life, an offering to the gods to ensure the pharaoh's eternal renewal. This was not just any lettuce, it was lettuce grown from the finest gardens, prepared and offered by the priests who maintained the royal crops. Even the process of preparing the lettuce for the tomb was intricate. The leaves were wrapped in linen, often adorned with a combination of other herbs that were thought to provide both physical and spiritual protection. The lettuce wasn't just for consumption in the afterlife, it was a sacred food that could help the soul move forward through the trials of the afterlife and then into the eternity that awaited in the field of reeds. But why lettuce? Why not a more common plant like wheat or barley, which were far more abundant? This question has puzzled scholars for years. Some speculate that it was because of lettuce's ability to maintain its fresh, dewy appearance even after being harvested, a symbol of beloved life that could endure beyond death. Others argue that its properties as a sleep inducer made it ideal for ensuring peaceful rest in the afterlife. Of course, there's also the possibility that the lettuce was a part of a larger, multi-layered ritual where plants and herbs were chosen not just for their physical properties, but for their spiritual symbolism. The ancient Egyptians, after all, were experts in the mystical. Each object, each ritual had meaning. To the priests, the lettuce likely represented life's continual renewal, an idea that was core to Egyptian spirituality. Some say that in the afterlife, the pharaoh would need to rest after his journey through the perilous underworld, and lettuce, with its calming and sleep-inducing properties, was the perfect plant to provide that rest. It's almost poetic when you think about it. The pharaoh, so accustomed to the opulence of his royal gardens, would rest peacefully in eternity, surrounded by the same plants that had helped him find peace in life. It's a strange thought, isn't it? To imagine that lettuce, of all things, was part of this sacred journey, a simple, humble plant that in the end played a pivotal role in the greatest transition of all. But there's a twist here. Not everyone agrees that lettuce was included in the burial rituals. Some historians suggest that it's possible the plant was simply symbolic, not an actual item placed in the tomb. Others think that it was an offering made outside of the tomb itself, as part of the larger funeral rites. Regardless of the exact role it played in the burial practices, there's no denying that lettuce had a connection to the afterlife, a link between the earthly realm and the divine. This plant, so closely associated with sleep, renewal, and calmness, bridged the gap between life and death, ensuring that the pharaoh's transition was peaceful, serene, and full of divine favor. As you continue your quiet walk, the significance of this moment washes over you. You stand in a place that has witnessed the passing of countless souls, where the living once carefully prepared the lettuce for the dead, and the dead once dreamed of journeys yet to come. The ancient Egyptians were, after all, masters of creating rituals that connected the worlds, both the seen and the unseen. In a way, lettuce was the bridge between those worlds. It wasn't just a vegetable, it was a part of a deeper spiritual reality, a reminder that everything, life, death, and everything in between, is connected in ways that we can't always understand. As the evening continues to settle, you feel the weight of that ancient wisdom, and you can't help but wonder. Maybe the pharaohs, with their careful rituals and deep spiritual knowledge, knew something that we've lost along the way. Maybe there's more to sleep, dreams, and the afterlife than we think. The night air grows cooler as you turn to leave, carrying with you a newfound appreciation for the simplest of things, the humble lettuce and all that it once represented. As you take your final steps out of the garden, the tranquil stillness lingers in your mind, like the fading echoes of a long forgotten hymn. The mysteries of the ancient Egyptian world, the rituals of lettuce, and the delicate connection between life, death, and the divine seem to follow you. The soft rustling of the leaves, which once seemed so insignificant, now feels almost sacred, a quiet reminder of the depth of human history. The past always has a way of catching up with us, doesn't it? No matter how much time passes, it continues to shape the present. And as you reflect on everything you've learned tonight, the power of lettuce, the reverence the ancient Egyptians held for their dreams, and the way even the smallest of rituals could carry so much meaning, it becomes clear that even the most ordinary things can hold extraordinary secrets. In a way, this journey through the world of ancient Egypt has been a reminder of just how much we've forgotten about the subtle connections that bind us all together. What once seemed mundane, the lettuce, the dreams, the simple act of sleeping, becomes something more profound when we begin to view it through the lens of history, culture, and the beliefs of those who lived thousands of years ago. And so, as you head back from the garden, the sounds of the world gradually return, faint whispers of the present day cutting through the stillness. The gentle hum of traffic, the soft flicker of streetlights, the distant voices of life continuing on. But there's a sense of peace in knowing that, even in our busy modern world, we still carry the echoes of ancient wisdom with us, tucked away in our dreams, in the foods we eat, and in the small moments of our everyday lives. As you prepare to drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you'll think of those ancient pharaohs and their carefully prepared lettuce drinks. Maybe, just maybe, a part of their peaceful slumber will accompany you as you close your eyes, allowing you to rest in the same calm that once soothed the rulers of Egypt. And perhaps you'll dream, just like they did, of faraway lands and divine messages that speak only to you. Now, as you settle into your own night of rest, remember that sleep, just like life, is a bridge that connects you to the present moment, to the past, and to whatever dreams might lie ahead. The lettuce, in its quiet simplicity, reminds us that peace and connection can be found even in the most unexpected places. The pharaohs sought it in their tombs, and perhaps, with a little bit of their wisdom, you can find it in your own dreams. Slowly, gently, you feel your breath begin to slow as you sink deeper into relaxation. The weight of the day fades away, leaving you with a calm, peaceful stillness that mirrors the ancient wisdom you've uncovered tonight. The world outside falls away, and all that remains is the quiet serenity of this moment. As you drift off, know that the journey has come to a close, but the mysteries of the past, like the lettuce, will continue to whisper to you as you rest, fading into a dream of timeless peace.